The story begins at night, in a high tower. The magical tower of Bohemirn appeared before us. In one of the castle's chambers, a light was burning, and screams were coming from there. The researcher was extremely unhappy that his subject was losing consciousness, and demanded that he come to his senses. The researcher ordered the stimulant to be injected into the subject's body again, causing the screams to resume. One observer said the subject lasted 461 seconds with the reagent. The researcher noted that the subject lasted longer than the others, making him a talented experimental subject. The researcher said that the magic circle should already be activated, and another observer reported that they had injected the subject with a memory-enhancing stimulant. The subject looked with the last of his strength at his tormentor. It was the head of the tower, a middle-aged man with dark hair. The boy understood that in this magical tower, known as the most powerful in the empire, he was slowly dying. In the office there were hanging cages and various bottles with serums and reagents. Looking at the ants in one of the flasks, the subject wondered why he, whose gifted mind was recognized, had ended up in this place. At some point, the thought appeared in the guy's mind that he could escape, just like one of the ants that had escaped from the bottle. However, the researcher ordered the stimulator to be forcibly activated, causing the boy's body to be pierced by severe pain. The room was filled with the clanking of chains and heart-rending screams. The subject begged the researchers to stop. The tower chief said that the guy was too noisy, so he decided to leave the office, ordering his subordinates to report when the experiment was completed. After a while, the pain subsided a little, and the subject's heavy breathing could be heard in the room. The guy was covered in blood and hanging from chains without strength. He looked at the blood-stained floor and tried to understand how all this could have happened. He didn't understand why he was now slowly dying in the magic tower he dreamed of getting into. The researcher grabbed the unconscious boy by the hair and ordered him to come to his senses. The blonde guy asked the test subject Verdun how he was feeling and said that it was all because the guy had become too arrogant after people had praised his intelligence a little. The blonde said that this is why Verdun is now being drained of his life force and knowledge. The researcher pulled the subject's hair and told him to act as he had done before. Verdun continued to watch the fleeing ant, and with the last bits of consciousness, he heard that he had no strength for anything at the moment. Receiving no answer, the researcher became angry and shook the boy's head, asking if he had gone deaf. The blonde noticed that Verdun was staring at something and decided to look at what had caught the subject's attention. The researcher noticed an escaped experimental ant and ordered his subordinates to catch it immediately. The subordinates apologized to Weller and hurried to the ant, but the blonde changed his mind about catching the insect and crushed it with his foot. After this, the researchers began to laugh at the fact that no one would look for Verdana, and they were very lucky to get an experimental S-rank sample. Weller recalled that Verdana had a friend named Ravelin who had received sponsorship to study abroad. The subject did not pay attention to the researchers' conversations and simply looked at the crushed ant. At some point, Verdun realized that he had nowhere to wait for help, and that he had to cope with everything himself, or he would die here and now. The subject told the researchers to shut up, but they didn't hear what he said and asked the guy again with a grin. Verdun's eyes lit up, and he shouted for them all to be quiet immediately. It all started 15 years ago, when the orphan Verdun came to the magic tower, because he wanted to become an incredible magician. But no matter how hard the guy tried, he could not become a magician. At the age of 7, the boy took a test for compatibility with magic, which showed that he would not become a magician. This was a big blow to the guy, but he did not give up, because this was his dream, so he secretly took the books left in the room when he was cleaning. The boy also mastered many books from the library of the magic tower, where he came at night. Even though the guy didn't have magical powers, he had no doubts about his own sanity. So several years passed, and his intelligence was finally recognized, and they began to call him a genius, and appointed him a research fellow at the magic tower. The senior staff were amazed by the boy's knowledge, and even the tower's head, Balrog, recognized the abilities of the young researcher. While writing one of his works, Verdun decided to ask his senior colleague Lucard's opinion. The man asked if no one else had seen this work, and the guy confirmed his suspicions. Lucard was the only research assistant he had ever been close to, and he recognized him, and Verdun hoped that he would have a chance to stay in the tower as a scientist. This is what the guy thought before Lucard published his work, passing it off as his own. Verdun learned about this too late, but still decided to go to the head of the tower. The guy begged me to believe him that the work had disappeared the day before the presentation, and then Lucard presented it on his own behalf. Verdun was sure that the respected head of the magical tower of Bogemirn, Balrog Besias, would not leave it like this. Verdun asked to hear his explanation, but the head of the tower interrupted him, saying that it was surprising. The man stood up and said that he did not know that there was such talent among the ranks of ordinary researchers. Now Verdun understands that none of this would have happened if he had not gone to the head of the tower that day. That day, Balrog asked the boy to come to his laboratory in 2 days, when the moon would disappear. Verdun tormented himself with the question of whether he would have been able to live the next 7 years peacefully if he had escaped from the magic tower that day. Thus, Verdun was imprisoned in the laboratory of the head of the tower, where he was a worker during the day and an object of experiments at night. The guy was told that they would try to create a magic circle to confirm his theory. They will inject medicine into his veins and watch the reaction, and they will also test the effectiveness of new potions. Verdun had achieved his goal. Now his life was dedicated to the magic tower, but he didn't want it to be that way. No one believed the boy when he tried to tell the truth, and after several attempts, the head of the tower began to threaten to kill everyone dear to Verdun. Now Verdun was locked in his cell after hours of torture and experiments. The guy thought that this was how his life would end, and he couldn't do anything about it. Verdun's consciousness began to drift away from fatigue into deep dreams. The boy dreamed that he was young again and running with his girlfriend on the street. As if from behind the bars of his prison, Verdun heard his own voice and Rovalin's voice. The boy didn't quite understand what was happening, but he definitely understood that he was seeing his childhood. The children's game was interrupted by the cry of one of the tower's magicians, who ordered young Verdun to hurry. That day, Rovalin took a promise from the boy that they would become great magicians together. The boy and girl sealed their vow with their little fingers. Verdun followed this promise all his life and tried his best. He managed to enter the magic tower, but his development potential was too low. The boy wondered if a different fate would have awaited him if his potential had been even a little higher. Verdun caught himself walking in his sleep and trying to cling to this ghostly dream. However, after he realized that he had been sleeping all this time, tears of despair began to flow from his eyes. Verdun sat down on the floor of his cell, and faint sounds began to reach him. The experimental ants were approaching him, and the boy caught himself thinking that he heard this sound every time during the experiments. Verdun didn't know if he still had the strength to fight, or if he should give up and die. The boy seemed to hear the ant crushed in the laboratory say that it was too early to die. The ants crawling around the chamber seemed to tell Verdun that nothing was over yet. The boy watched in silence as a multitude of ants filled the room. At some point, the insects began to form the silhouette of a man. Verdun thought he saw a boy who told him to hold on, grit his teeth, and endure. The boy said that if Verdun endured this, he would be reborn, and no one would be able to trample him anymore, since he would gain great power. When this happens, Verdun will be able to surpass his capabilities. These words helped the guy to pull himself together again and get ready for the best. Verdun agreed with the boy's words and said that nothing was over. The boy must sharpen the blade for revenge for the past 7 years with everything he has until it becomes sharp. Verdun will not break and will solve this one and only problem. The guy understands that in the face of great power, it is not enough to simply be smarter than others. Since this is how things turned out, Verdun needs to challenge fate, ignore the boundaries of theory, and complete the creation of a way to restructure the body. The guy will do his best to create a theory of opposition to the heavens. Verdun's entire chamber was covered in theories and pentagrams. It was a moment of weakness that the boy overcame again. Now he is confident that tomorrow he will surpass his capabilities. The long-awaited theory of opposition to heaven, which would allow Verdun to reconstruct his body, was completed the moment the boy accepted death. Now all he has to do is prove it. One artifact can allow someone who has no magic at all to use magic once. The rest will develop in the process. Verdun gathered his courage, got dressed, and decided that tomorrow he would regain his freedom. A long night passed, and finally the day came when Verdun would carry out his plan. In the morning, Weller came and opened the subject's chamber. The researcher ordered Verdun to start cleaning the laboratory. The blonde ordered the guy to clean up the blood and heal his cuts, and mocked the guy for thinking he could shirk work because of his condition. Not hearing an answer, Weller turned to the subject and asked again if he understood him. Verdun didn't want to contact the blonde at the moment, so he simply replied that he understood everything. Over the next few hours, Verdun painstakingly cleaned the tower chief's laboratory. He had healed his wounds as best he could, and was now restoring order to the place that had become a prison and torture chamber for him. After a while, the guy was distracted by a familiar voice, which asked if the guy was really cleaning here alone. Verdun was visited by Rovalin, a tall girl with red hair and eyes. The guy asked what she was doing there, and the girl replied that she came to say goodbye to a friend before leaving. Verdun remembered that Rovalin would now study abroad in the magical city of Virent. The guy said that such a privilege is given only to the most distinguished talents of the magic tower. Verdun congratulated his friend, but the girl looked puzzled. Rovalin said that her offer for Verdun to go with her to Virent still stood. The girl believes that in that place the guy will not have to deal with ignorant fools who despise him, thanks to which he will get new opportunities to study magic. Here Rovalin thought that the guy might misunderstand her, and said that she would just need someone she could talk to. Verdun interrupted the girl, and with an absent smile on his face said that he would stay in the magic tower. Rovalyn was clearly upset by this refusal and looked worried. Before leaving, the girl promised that she would write letters to Verdun. The guy watched from behind the bars of his prison cell as his girlfriend's carriage drove away and realized that the girl knew nothing about it. Rovalyn doesn't even have a clue what they've been doing with Verdun in this place all this time. The guy was distracted from watching his girlfriend leaving by an order to immediately follow the researcher. Despite everything, Verdun was grateful to Rovalyn. Because the girl left, she won't be able to interfere with the guy's plan. The busiest day in the tower was the festival dedicated to the construction of the first magic tower. This day celebrates the revival of magic. When the festival begins, all the high-ranking mages go to the big cities, and only the low-ranking mages remain in their places. Approaching the door, Verdun knocked and entered only after receiving permission. The man with black hair sitting inside asked the guy what he was doing there and said that he would punish him if there was no important news. Verdun said that the tower chief ordered him to clean up the vault, but the guard began to scold him for not warning him about it in advance. The man accepted the drink he brought and said that Verdun could start working, but would be punished if he scratched or lost anything. The guy replied that he understood everything and headed towards the door to the storage facility. Verdun listened to see if the guard was following him, but when he did not hear any footsteps, he closed the vault door behind him. The guy walked up and touched the artifact standing next to the door. Verdun successfully activated the artifact that blocks sound. The guy started to descend the stairs, which were made up of large books floating in the air. Verdun looked around and examined the books standing on the shelves of the tall cabinets. The lower the guy went, the longer the stairs became under his feet. After some time, Verdun managed to get down to the very bottom of the shelves. In this place a wind arose, but it was not of natural origin, but of magical origin. Before the guy appeared the second circle, an ancient artifact, the creation of which the head of the tower spent an astronomical sum. This artifact allows the mage to cast 3 spells and temporarily awakens the hidden talents of its owner. To carry out the plan, Verdun will need this staff, but to take it, it is necessary to disable the protective magic circle. The artifact is guarded by a 7th level spell, and the tower's master cast it personally. For the past 7 years, Verdun has been studying how to remove this protective circle. Verdun was pleased that the head of the tower himself would be shocked that a talentless guy could remove the spell he was so proud of. The guy said that with his own strength, he would destroy this protection. Verdun extended his hands to the staff, and the protection fell apart. Meanwhile, the low-level mages who remained on duty celebrated the festival without expecting any threat. One of the mages, who had a beard, was outraged that they had to guard the source of power while the others were having fun. The man said he tolerated it only because he was chosen in a draw. The attention of the magicians was drawn to Verdun entering the room, and the senior magician immediately recognized the guy and ordered him to bring them more drinks. Verdun walked over to the drinks table and listened as the elder mage said that he would no longer drink cheap alcohol when he took over as head of the tower. The younger one laughed at him and said that he would personally provide the drinks if his friend became the leader. But they did not notice that Verdun was not going to obey them anymore. The man with the beard agreed with his friend and said that he would definitely become the head of the tower. The next moment, a beam of light flashed before the eyes of the younger magician and cut off the head of the elder. The magician turned to Verdun in horror and asked what he was doing. However, his confidence ended the moment he saw the staff in the boy's hands. The man froze in place, after which he asked if Verdun had gone crazy. The guy looked at the magician angrily and said that this was not the reaction he expected. The magician asked what right the untalented servant had to try to harm the magician. The man grabbed his staff and said he would set the boy's brains back in place if he survived his spell. The magician activated a 3rd-level magic spell, Tsunami. Verdun did not flinch and responded with a 3rd-level spell. Using his staff, the boy summoned an earthen spear. The tsunami was broken up into giant chunks of dense earth. Several pieces broke off under the influence of the water, but they steadily approached the magician. The water blocked the mage's view, but by the time he saw the approaching threat, it was too late. Blood splattered on the floor and screams were heard. The magician did not understand how Verdun, being a first-rank researcher, was able to use magic. Verdun pointed his spear at him and asked if he was surprised that the subject of his experiments was capable of such a thing. The guy said that this happens when you play too much with people. Verdun pointed his staff at the magician and said that the same applies to the head of the tower. After a few moments, the talking and shouting stopped. Walking past the tortured magicians, Verdun stopped next to a huge window. For the first time in his life, the guy looked so closely at the source of the magic tower's power. It looked like a huge heart with wires coming out of it. Verdun thought that it had taken him 7 long years to get here. Now, using the mana of the source, the guy will begin to confront the heavens, and if he fails, he does not know what will happen to him. The guy took off his shirt and we saw symbols and a pentagram covering his entire body. Verdun was not afraid of what would happen next, because if he did not try, he would not be able to know for sure whether his theory worked. The guy hit the floor with his staff. After this, a large pentagram formed underneath him. Verdun stood in front of the source of mana for the entire tower. The boy activated another spell with the staff, Body Reformation. Verdun pointed his hand at the crystal in his staff and activated the Heaven Opposition spell. A huge amount of mana began to flow out of the tower's heart and into the guy. The stream was so strong that the glow penetrated the walls and illuminated the street, plunged into the darkness of the night. It seemed as if the entire tower was glowing from within. The light from the energy shot into the sky, creating a column of energy that shot into the heavens. This pillar was visible for kilometers from the tower. The head of the tower was riding in a carriage at that moment, and immediately realized that this was a huge surge of energy from the source. The man had no doubt that someone had broken into his magic tower. After some time, the magical pillar of energy disappeared, and in its place there was destruction. Coughing up dust, Verdun made his way through the ruins of the magic tower. After a few minutes of effort, the boy was able to get out into the air. The staff that the boy had previously held in his hands crumbled before his eyes. Verdun decided that if he survived the collapsed building, then he had succeeded. The guy's attention was drawn to a flash in the sky. Verdun saw pentagrams appearing and disappearing in the sky, indicating that someone was rapidly approaching him. A few moments later, he saw the head of the tower, who was angry as never before. Verdun assumed that the magician sensed that something had happened to his people. The first thing the head of the tower saw upon arrival was the destroyed magic tower, and then the silhouette of a man below. The man did not waste time asking questions and directed his magic at the person. A blast wave was formed at the point where the force collided with the ground. The tower leader landed on the ground and tried to see the man through the smokescreen. Coming closer, the man still couldn't see anyone. The head of the tower noticed a teleportation magic circle on the ground where the man had previously stood. The man was angry and did not understand who could dare to touch the magic tower. After a few moments, the head came to his senses and stood up. He said he didn't care whether it was the emperor or a little child who did it. The man swore that he would find and destroy the culprit. Such evil energy emanated from the head that the clouds thickened and lightning appeared. The next day, the weather improved, although there were some clouds in the sky. The sun warmed the forest in the mountains, but left it cool under the shade of the trees. Verdun had not experienced such wonderful weather for a long time, so now he did not have the strength to move. The guy didn't want to wake up and decided to lie down a little longer, enjoying the sound of the water. After a few moments, it dawned on him that the sound of water was so close that he began to choke, causing him to suddenly come to his senses. Verdun sat down on the grass and could not understand how he ended up there, because after implementing the plan, he needed to run away from the tower as quickly as possible. The next moment, the guy was even more surprised, as he saw his reflection in the mountain river. An unfamiliar guy with white hair was looking at him from the reflection. Verdun touched his face and asked why he looked like that. The boy touched the ash-colored hair that had previously been brown. Verdun looked at his eyes, which had brightened and were now pure blue. The guy didn't understand what happened during the reconstruction of his body, but he became a completely different person. Verdun began to slowly but surely remember the events of the previous day. He personally dealt with the people from the magic tower and dealt with the opposition of the heavens. Before the tower leader could find him, the boy managed to use movement magic and disappear. During the teleportation, Verdun lost consciousness due to fatigue and ended up in this place. The boy looked around and realized that he had never seen such a forest, and there had never been such plants in the magical tower of Bogamirn. Verdun smiled and guessed that he had managed to travel halfway across the continent. The guy leaned back and was glad that his plan had worked, and now he was a free man. Verdun was sure that the tower leader would be even more angry when he found witnesses that his lab rat had escaped. The guy calmed down a little, as he understood that this was not enough to destroy the magic tower. Even though the mages have lost their employees, the leader will definitely take countermeasures, because it is not for nothing that Balrog Bessian was called the all-powerful man. However, Verdun was calm, because while the magic tower was being rebuilt, he would have enough time to become stronger, to take revenge. The guy swore that he would destroy everything that the head of the tower built, and his name would be preserved in history. Verdun's main goal is to take revenge and realize himself as a magician. Now the guy is confident that he can say goodbye to the magic tower. After resting a little more in a clearing near the river, Verdun went to scout out the territory. After some time, the guy saw a goblin trying to open a wooden chest with an axe. Verdun extended his hand forward and summoned a wind cutter. A flash of light caught the monster's attention and it turned towards the man. However, the next moment, the goblin lost his head. Verdun looked at his hand and said that he didn't feel any difference. The guy decided that there was a problem during the reconstruction of the body, because except for the color of the hair and eyes, everything remained unchanged, even the amount of mana. Verdun kicked the goblin's head and said that if goblins were walking around the area, It meant the village was far away. Walking forward, the guy noticed traces of a cart on the ground. Sitting down next to the box, Verdun assumed that someone had been in a hurry and had dropped their things. The boy used a mana detection spell to find the owner of the lost items. A few moments later, a glowing trail stretched forward from the box. The rays twisted and crawled along the road, following the tracks of the cart. A few moments later, the rays reached the carriage and illuminated it for a moment, causing the coachman to cry out. The guy began to urge the horse on. The young guy with black hair was shaking with fear and did not understand how he managed to get into such trouble. The guy remembers that it wasn't such a big problem that they ran into the remnants of the bandits. The inability to negotiate, and the chatter about him having connections with Baron Pite and all the mercenaries running away in fear was not a problem either. When there was no hope left for salvation from the bandits, another side joined them. What scared the coachman most was the creepy smile of the orc who ate the man in front of the boy. Despite this, the guy was grateful to them, because while the monsters were dealing with the bandits, the coachman managed to escape unnoticed. At this moment, the guy was diligently urging his horse to go as far as possible. Suddenly, a loud roar was heard behind him, which made the coachman think that the orcs were still chasing him. The boy began to furiously beat the horse with a whip to make it run faster. However, the coachman did not pay close attention to the road, which caused the cartwheel to crash into a tree root. A few moments later, the cart overturned. The boy flew off the cart and flew to the side, falling to the ground. Sometime later, the coachman began to come to his senses and complain that his back hurt. Suddenly, it dawned on the guy that he had been running away for a reason all this time. Looking towards the forest, the coachman noticed many monster eyes that were looking at him greedily. The monsters began to emerge from behind the trees and slowly but surely approach the guy. The brunette crawled back to the tree and couldn't believe that the monsters would kill him. The next moment, the monsters rushed at the guy, leaving him no chance to escape. The coachman closed his eyes and prayed that death would come quickly, and that he would not have to suffer. However, before the monsters could touch the boy, an earthen wall grew between them. The first of the attacking goblins crashed head-on into the wall, protecting the man. A dense dome formed around the guy, which was slowly but surely surrounded by monsters, and Verdun said that he forgot to leave the man an opening for air. The orc leader turned towards the voice. Verdun stood on a mountain of earth and said that he would have to deal with the monsters until the guy suffocated. All the monsters turned towards their new target in anticipation. Verdun raised his hand and said that this was his first real fight, not counting the goblin he met in the forest. The orcs either didn't understand the guy's words, or they thought they were funny. Verdun, meanwhile, extended his hand, engulfed in flames, forward, and said that this was a great opportunity to test out his abilities. A few moments later, the entire space was engulfed in flames. The sun-dried trees burst into flames in 1 second. However, Verdun did not pay attention to this and used the spell Multi-Fire Arrows. A multitude of fire projectiles were directed towards the monsters and set most of them on fire. The attack did not reach the orcs standing behind the small monsters. The leader of the monsters waited until Verdun's next fire attack ended and sent his subordinates into battle. A multitude of orcs and goblins rushed towards the magician. However, the guy did not show a drop of fear and waited for the enemy to come closer. Verdun activated the runes and strengthened the multi-fire arrows, adding a whirlwind to them. By combining the two spells, the boy strengthened them. At the same moment, pentagrams appeared above the heads of the orcs, from which fire emanated. Verdun extended his hand forward and cast the Fire Wave Arrow spell. The next second, a powerful explosion lit up the sky. The roar echoed throughout the forest, frightening its inhabitants. This spell alone was enough to get rid of an entire group of monsters, regardless of their size and strength. Verdun went down and was surprised at what he had managed to do, because before he had not been able to kill even one goblin. The guy looked around, noticed the rain starting, and noted that no one was left alive. Verdun headed towards the dome where the man was sitting, intending to free him, and did not notice that the orc's hand was moving behind his back. The orc rose from the ground and walked towards the mage, who did not suspect anything. Hearing a growl from behind him, Verdun turned around sharply. The next moment, the ground was sprinkled with blood. After some time, all the enemies were finished, and Verdun helped the coachman lift the cart, and they set off. The coachman said his name was Conrad, and he cheerfully promised that he would never forget this day. The brunette turned to Verdun, who was sitting in the cart, and asked how he could repay him for saving him. The blonde sighed and said that the guy just needed to watch the road, otherwise the cart would tip over again. Conrad was not appeased and asked if that horde of monsters posed any threat to Verdun. The coachman's talkativeness began to irritate the magician, but he noted to himself that it was still a little dangerous. At that moment, when Verdun realized that one orc had managed to survive, he became confused and scared. Turning around, the guy saw the monster raising his fist over him. Verdun's body managed to react faster than the guy could even realize it. The mage used a wind cutter spell and cut off the monster's head. Thinking back on it now, Verdun threw his head back and told Conrad that there was nothing to worry about. The magician asked how often monsters appeared in this area, and the coachman replied that he had encountered them here for the first time. Conrad reported that this forest is under the control of Baron Pite. As a child, the boy often exchanged letters with him and was told that the thieves in this area were exterminated, so Conrad did not hire expensive mercenaries. But luck turned its back on him. Verdun previously thought that the teleportation had failed, but apparently he was transported to the right place, since he is on Baron Pite's land. Even though the magician has erased all traces and changed his appearance, the magic tower of Bogamirn can search for him, so he must hide his identity and become stronger. All this time Conrad was talking, but when he didn't receive an answer, he asked if the guy was listening, and Verdun replied that he hadn't introduced himself yet. The magician decided that the time when he would introduce himself by the name Verdun would come when he met the head of the tower, and until that moment he would be called Asher. As the street plunged into deep night, Conrad and Asher reached Baron Pite's estate. The Baron was shocked when he saw the battered state of his friend and asked what had happened. Pite noted that the guy had lost weight, and Conrad joked that he had lost the weight while running away from the orcs. The Baron began to apologize to his friend for the fact that such a thing happened on his territory, but Conrad did not hold a grudge against him. Pite turned his attention to Conrad's fellow traveler and said that he would not stand aside, since his friend's savior was right in front of him. Since Asher was standing far away, the Baron asked his friend to accompany the magician to the estate and give him a good reception. After some time, Asher entered the main hall and thanked the owner for providing him with clothes, food, and lodging. The owner of the estate greeted the magician with a smile and invited him to come to the table. The man formally introduced himself personally, saying that his name was Baron Pite Henrod, and that he was the manager of these lands. The host hospitably invited the guests to sit at the table. There were many exquisite dishes on the table, and Pite asked if Asher liked them, and he could not answer negatively. The owner said that for saving Conrad, he had prepared 5 million elks and asked when to give them to Asher. Pite apologized for the rush and said that he would like to hire a magician for the job and promised a decent fee for it. Asher decided that this was a good opportunity to earn money and try his skills in combat, so he asked what the job entailed. Pite said that a few days ago they found bodies hanging in the southern forest. An investigation showed that they were all residents of a neighboring farming family. At first they were not sure who the culprit was, but later they found out that it was the bandits who did it. However, after searching the entire area, nothing could be found, as if all traces of the bandits had been erased by magic. Asher suggested that there was a mage among the bandits, and asked when Pite was going to give chase. The Baron took this as an agreement to work, and said with a smile that the assembly would take place in 4 days. After 4 days, Asher met with the man who had been assigned to help him. A middle-aged man with a mustache and gray hair introduced himself as Baron Pite Enoch's knight, and said that he had been put in charge of this task. The knight introduced the dark-haired youth Harris and the young lad Peric, who would accompany them on the mission. Asher shook Enoch's hand and introduced himself in return. The magician was upset because he thought this task would be a good chance, but he didn't know that he would have to chase bandits. However, Asher decided to do this, believing that this was his retribution for staying in the estate. Asher noticed a crowd gathering nearby and asked if these people were going with them. Enoch said that they were adventurers who had gathered when they heard rumors of orcs that had recently appeared. Asher assumed that the reward for the murder was high, since even gold-ranked adventurers responded to the task. Gold-ranked adventurers are on the same level as regular knights, meaning they can use energy to strengthen themselves and their weapons. Rumor has it that with such a rank they are able to kill monsters, but then Asher does not understand why they needed him. After some time on the road, Enoch asked to let him know if there really was a magician among the bandits, but Asher decided to ask why they needed him. Enoch said that if the enemy has a mage with long-range attacks, it will be difficult for the knights to deal with him, so they need support. However, the knight hopes that Asher's abilities will not be needed, but the magician hastened to disappoint him. Asher stopped and looked somewhere ahead, and people crowded behind him, waiting for the unknown. The magician waved his hand and said that there was a magic circle in front of them. Asher cast a dispel spell and heard the glass crack. The invisible dome protecting the magic circle cracked and shattered into pieces. Asher moved the shards aside so that no one would get hurt. A giant magic circle appeared before everyone's eyes, and Enoch couldn't understand how it ended up on their territory. Asher said that the spell he had just removed was a camouflage, but now he would remove everything else. The guy waved his hand, and a blue flash moved towards the magic circle. Trusting the actions of the magician, the rest of the squad stepped back, watching Asher at work. The beam of energy cut the magic circle into 2 parts, causing it to slowly disintegrate. Enoch saw something like this for the first time in his life and was shocked. Only now did the man begin to understand that they were faced with no ordinary magician, but who he was remained a mystery to them. Explorers are people who belong to a guild that accepts orders from all over the continent to explore unknown territories and exterminate monsters. Death always follows adventurers, but despite this, people admire them, because with ability comes wealth and fame. However, when the adventurer becomes too strong, he gets tired of his old business and switches to orders to kill people. As a result, the adventurer becomes a robber. One of these bandits was now assessing the carcass of a shot animal, while the magician was watching. The man with long black hair was outraged that they couldn't recover from Pate's attack, and now they were also attacked by orcs. The squad had very little food left, so the captain ordered his men to go hunting. Enoch's squad watched all this from the side. The knight said that the bandits had let their guard down, so now was the best time to attack. But Asher stopped him. The guy said that they hadn't yet assessed the strength of the bandit mage, so they couldn't just attack, because the enemy might have more magic circles than him. However, the knight was worried that if they delayed too long, the enemy might escape. Asher looked again at the bandit leader and the magician, and said that he had an idea. The captain of the bandits, Varya, continued to complain about the fact that they had only hired new subordinates, but they had already killed them all. From the conversation of the bandits, we learned that those guilty of killing the mercenaries were the very same orcs that Asher exterminated. Varya thought about it, and suggested to the magician Vilshin to attack another village, but the magician was categorically against it, since the previous attack had angered the Baron. Vilshin said that they had not been found yet thanks to concealment magic, but it was time for them to hit the road, and there was a city called Martes right next to them. The magician wanted to suggest plundering the village next to this city, but he was interrupted by a loud discharge of energy. Vilshin barely managed to step aside, avoiding the attack. Varya also took a break from his work and took up a fighting stance. The next moment, an explosion occurred at the point where the energy collided with the ground. At the last moment, Vilshin managed to create a barrier, but from the look of the explosion, he was able to determine that it was of magical origin. The magician shouted to the bandits that they had been discovered, and at that moment Piet's fighters appeared from the ambush. Enoch, Harris, and Peric were in the front ranks, and their first target was the bandit leaders. The knight struck Vilshina's protective dome, forcing the bandits to retreat back. The blow was so powerful that the magical energy changed direction and hit the magician's body. Varya called out worriedly to Vilshin, who began to fall. At this point, Varju was told that the barrier was a defensive ability that was quick to cast but easy to destroy, after which it would strike back at its creator. The leader of the bandits did not have to think much to understand that there was also a magician on the enemy side. Asher came out from behind the bushes and said that now the enemy's strength was clear to him, so he would calmly deal with the magician, as he had agreed with Enoch. The knight had no doubt about the correctness of the plan, and said that he relied on Asher. Varya guessed that the Baron was really angry this time, since he hired a magician and sent a squad to kill them. However, the guy was sure that they would not succeed. Drawing both swords, Varya charged into battle with Enoch and their swords crossed. Varya promised that he would send the Baron their heads in response to the attack. Enoch was confident that Asher would be able to support them, so he only laughed at the robber's words. After some time, the battle was in full swing. Asher pursued Vilshin, but had no intention of starting a fight near the knight's detachment. Vilshin planned to distract Asher and escape, but the boy continued to pursue him. Since the blond man used an earthen wall, Vilshin assumed that his opponent was not that strong, since only those with 3 circles could fly. Vilshin jumped down and looked at Asher standing on the created rock, then asked how long he was going to stand there. Without waiting for an answer, Vilshin cast the multi-ice arrows spell. The magician was counting on the fact that if Asher really only had 2 circles, then he would be able to kill him and calmly escape. The blonde in turn counterattacked with multi-fire arrows. The fiery energy was directed at the ice energy, causing panic in Vilshin. At one moment, 2 contrasting temperatures collided, creating a large flow of energy. A powerful explosion occurred at the site of the collision. For a while, the forest was plunged into silence. A large crater was formed at the site of the collision of energies. Vilshin survived the blast and said Asher was fighting well for a man with 2 rings, but he still thought he would win. Vilshin said that if the magician had come with a knight, he would have had problems, but with Asher alone he was sure that he could handle it without any problems. The blond man appeared from behind a cloud of smoke and said that he had no plans to let the enemy go. Vilshin admitted that the use of such strong attributes at such a young age was surprising, and recognized Asher as a promising talent. However, the man was confident that he would win this battle thanks to his experience. Vilshin didn't have much strength left, so he decided not to drag out the battle and use the magic of the 3rd circle. The mage created a huge rune in the sky and summoned falling ice. A huge block of ice appeared from the magic circle and was ready to fall on the enemy's head at any moment. Wilson didn't wait long and directed the ice towards Asher. A few moments later there was a loud crash, after which the field fell silent. Wilson looked at what happened in shock and could not believe his eyes. A dozen earthen peaks tightly supported his block of ice. Asher, in turn, stood under the ice floe with his hand raised up. Wilson couldn't believe that a mage with 2 magic circles was able to so calmly repel his attack. Asher, in turn, began to gather energy again. A few moments later, the guy cast the Earth Spear spell. Asher clenched his fist sharply, activating the power of the earth. Within a second, under the action of the earthen columns, the ice floe shattered into small pieces. Earthen spears, which looked more like whips with many spikes, circled above Asher's head. Wilson didn't understand how a mage with 2 circles could use a 3rd circle spell. All this time, Asher watched his reaction, and then asked if Wilson really still hadn't figured anything out. Only now did Wilson realize that Asher not only used a 3rd circle spell, but also possessed 4 attributes. It then dawned on the robber that the blonde had been playing with him like a mouse from the very beginning. However, as soon as he realized this, an earthen spear pierced him. Asher stepped aside a little and stretched. The guy said that it was good that he decided to come here on Baron Pite's orders, because now he knows how to fight against the magician. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest, things were not so good. The orcs defeated the group of adventurers, and a medallion hung around the neck of the leader of the monsters. Asher had previously seen it on the neck of a man who held a gold rank. 2 days before the expedition, Asher created an experimental medicine using ingredients brought from the magic tower. The guy nicknamed the drug the magic chain extender. Remembering the hellish days spent in the magic tower, Asher no longer has the desire to conduct experiments on people again. However, the guy had no choice. Asher injected himself with this drug, thanks to which he was able to gain the 3rd circle. At the moment, Asher looked at Wilson's body and thought about whether he should bring something as proof of his victory over the bandits. The guy looked at the defeated magician and his gaze caught on his opponent's wand. Asher picked her up and cast an appraisal spell. This magical stone wand has a spell cast on it that reduces the casting time of spells and increases the effectiveness of ice-related spells. The guy decided that such a thing would be useful to him, but he was distracted by Peric's voice. The young knight was worried about Asher being missing, but the mage informed him that the fight was more difficult than he expected, so he had to step aside a little. Peric looked around and said that judging by the destruction around him, the fight had indeed been difficult. Asher caught the guy's attention when he said that they had already dealt with the bandits. Peric confirmed this and said that now only the leader remained, but Sir Enoch was already fighting him. Peric took the mage's body and was about to head towards the squad, but Asher stopped him, asking permission to ask a question. The guy agreed to answer, and then the magician squeezed the opponent's wand in his hands and asked what was supposed to be done with the bandits' things. Peric replied that the Baron allowed them to take whatever they had their eye on, unless he himself needed it. Asher relaxed and the smiling silhouette of Baron Pite appeared in his memories. The magician was glad to hear that he could keep the wand for himself, as he would still have some use for it. When all the opponents were defeated and some of the bandits were taken prisoner, Enoch thanked Asher for his work. Varge looked at the corpse of his mage and could not believe that they could kill him. The leader hid the knife behind his back. He understood that he would be handed over to the Baron, but he could not allow this. Varge had no choice but to take advantage of the element of surprise. The leader of the bandits cut his ropes, took out his sword and killed the soldiers guarding him. Varge rushed towards Enoch and Asher who were standing nearby. He understood that he couldn't deal with them without Vilshan's magic, so he had only one way out. He needed to kill the knight, steal his horse and escape. Varge attacked Enoch, but he was not so simple and easily parried the blow. The robber tried to strike again, but the knight grabbed his arm. Letting go of his sword, Enoch grabbed Varge by the collar of his shirt with his other hand, stunning him. After this, the knight threw the robber over his shoulder. The impact with the ground knocked all the air out of Varge's lungs. While the robber was coming to his senses, Enoch stepped aside and ordered the soldiers to tie up the man. Varya was outraged that Enoch dared to throw away his sword, as this went against knightly pride. The knight pulled his dagger from its sheath and said that he did not understand what was being discussed. Enoch raised his dagger over Varge and said that pride is a pastime for the living. The robber looked in horror at the knight's actions, but it was too late. The blow had been struck. After some time, the soldiers dragged away Varge's body, and Enoch apologized to Enoch for such an unsightly scene. The knight said that if he had more time, he would have cut off his opponent's head, but Asher reassured him, saying that it was impressive. Asher asked why the rest of the bandits were left alive, and the knight replied that there were familiar faces among them. Asher believes that some of them are survivors of the attack on the farm town, so it will take time to figure things out. Harris said they were returning to the estate and ordered the soldiers to lead the bandits. One of the bandits looked at his comrades being taken away and began to panic. The guy didn't want to die like that, so he tried to escape. However, the prisoner was unable to run far, as he tripped and fell. Harris wanted to deal with the robber personally, but Asher stopped him, saying that something was wrong. Soon, from the direction in which the robber had fled, cries and pleas for help were heard. After a few moments, the screams stopped, and all the soldiers and knights smelled the familiar smell of blood in the air. A strange hum came from the forest, attracting the attention of the entire squad. The next moment, an object flew out of the thicket, but Harris easily blocked it with his sword. The object flew to the side, hit the ground several times, and then rolled away. When it stopped, everyone could see that it was the head of the escaped robber. After this, a huge shadow loomed over the soldiers, forcing them to draw their weapons. Many could not believe that they were facing orcs. Asher looked at his opponent and began to guess who he was and what he was like. From the amulet hanging on the orc's neck, the boy guessed that the monsters had defeated the group of adventurers. The monster was of gigantic proportions, so Asher began to doubt whether it was worth calling it an orc. Using magic, the mage was able to sense that the orc was not alone, as he sensed a dozen more like him. Asher assumed that they had encountered the leader of the monsters. Looking at this orc, the magician remembered the one he defeated last time, because they were similar due to the corners of the mouth, which created the impression that the monster was smiling. The height of this orc is striking, as it towers significantly over other members of its species. The monster raised his hand and pointed towards the squad, giving the signal to begin the attack. Enoch ordered the soldiers to focus on the goblins, as they would worry about the orcs later. Distracted by the instructions, the knight almost missed the blow of the monster leader. The man was able to defend himself from the blow, but the force of his opponent knocked him off his feet. The next thing Enoch saw was the foot of a huge orc, which was trying to crush him. Before the leg could touch the knight, two swordsmen cut it crosswise. Perrick and Harris arrived in time to protect their captain. Enoch took advantage of the monster's hesitation and jumped from his place, knocking the orc off his feet. The knight found himself deep inside the monster and pierced it with his sword. After that, the man pushed off with his feet and slid down. The sword remained inside the orc's flesh, thereby ripping open his stomach. The monster fell completely backwards and stopped moving. However, the orc continued to laugh, and his eyes glowed with anger. The monster grabbed the goblin standing next to him in his fist. After this, the orc ate his little relative, under the shocked looks of the knights. A few moments later, the satisfied orc rose from the ground and spat out the goblin's bones. Even the deepest wounds on the monster's body healed, and he was ready to continue the fight. All members of the squad were shocked by the monster's behavior, but they were also ready for battle. Enoch stepped forward and said that they would not be able to return home peacefully. Enoch ordered the soldiers and knights to prepare for battle. The leader of the monsters swung his sword and threw it at the knights. A weapon of gigantic proportions was aimed towards Harris. Seeing the sword, which was larger than the boy himself, the knight became frightened. However, at the last moment he gathered himself and blocked the blow with his sword. While Harris was wondering why the orc had thrown his sword at him, he noticed that his own weapon was cracking. The next second, his weapon couldn't withstand the force and shattered into tiny pieces. The fragments of the broken sword caused multiple cuts on the knight's face. A second later, the orc's giant sword pierced Harris. Perrick was scared and broken by the unfair death of his friend. The guy was so distracted that he didn't notice that he had become the next target of the monster leader. Enoch warned Perrick, and the boy raised his sword to knock the orc's hand away. The guy was going to cut off the monster's limb with one blow, but something went wrong. The sword was firmly stuck in the orc leader's muscles and stopped obeying its owner. The boy tried with all his might to pull out the weapon, but the only thing he noticed was the second hand of the monster that was about to crush him. Asher arrived in time and distracted the monster by hitting him in the face with earthen spears. Frightened by the prospect of imminent death, Perrick remained in place, unable to move. Asher stood behind the young knight and called him to come closer to him, which helped bring the boy to his senses. Perrick ran up to the magician and said that he was safe, but he didn't know what to do next, because the sword remained in the monster's hand. Asher speculated that the orc's recovery speed and physical endurance increased after he ate the goblin. Perrick said that he tried his best to cut off the monster's hand, but nothing worked, which made the guy think that this orc was a creature from legends. However, Asher categorically dismissed these suspicions, which greatly surprised the knight, because the monster was really strong. The magician understood that this monster had the ability to restore and strengthen through absorption. He controls those below him and provokes their madness, and his strength is comparable to that of a knight. This orc is clearly different from the ordinary representatives of his kind. However, if these are all his abilities, then he is too weak to be called a special entity. Normal spells have a limit, and even if you put more magic into them, the area of effect will not expand beyond a fixed amount. If the limit is exceeded, the magic itself will fade away, because this is the law of magic, but there is a spell without a limit. Asher summoned a magic circle and activated the spell. Earth Control. The magician put power into the runes, which caused the magic circle to glow much brighter. The next moment, the ground around him began to crack, scaring away the soldiers standing nearby. People did not understand what was happening. They only felt the earth moving under their feet. Some of them fell to their knees and screamed that they were finished, because first they were attacked by monsters, and now they were caught in an earthquake. Enoch gave the order to remain calm and not leave their positions, and reported that it was not an earthquake, but Asher's magic. The next moment, the ground beneath the feet of the knights and soldiers began to rise. This time Enoch admitted that it was impossible to remain calm in such a situation, because now they towered over the orcs, standing on an artificially created platform. All the rest of the land around the people sank down, leaving the monsters in the lowlands, thus trapped. Losing their footing, the monsters fell down, screaming loudly. Several smaller goblins were crushed under the weight of their leader. The orc leader looked angrily at Asher, who towered over him and growled. The guy watched him calmly. Asher's attacks did not end there, and he created another magic circle. This time the boy used a third circle spell, Flame Ball. The fireball headed down towards the monsters at high speed. From the monster's point of view, it looked like an asteroid falling, burning everything in its path. Perek watched this with enthusiasm, but Enoch, helping to treat Harris's wounds, ordered him to maintain his dignity. The fireball spell has no limits. Their size depends on the amount of mana, but many mages do not use it, because the result is not so impressive. If Asher had enough mana, the power would be stronger than the third circle, but it is beyond his capabilities. The magician was distracted from his thoughts by the loud roar of the leader of the monsters. Asher looked down and realized that the monster had once again survived by continually eating its own kind. Perek ran up to Asher in fear and asked what they should do next. The magician decided that if the monster did not want to burn, then it was worth trying his other element. Using a summoning spell, Asher summoned a wave. After this, the magician jumped off the ledge, causing Perek to cry out in concern. However, Asher had a plan that he continued to follow. Without waiting for landing, the guy used multi-ice arrows, combining them with a winter hurricane. 2 large magic circles appeared above Asher and merged into one. Thanks to Wilson's wand, the spell was cast quickly and transformed into a double spell. The next second, the orc leader was pierced by arrows of fierce cold. The attack did not cause much damage to the monster, but its other relatives were covered in a thick layer of ice. Part of the monster leader's body was covered in frost, indicating that some parts of the body had been frozen. However, one hand remained capable of movement, so the orc tried to reach the magician with it. The guy deftly dodged the attack, as the monster's actions were slowed down. Asher understood that even if an orc could regenerate infinitely and not feel pain, it would not help against the freeze. The magician ran around the monster and attacked it from behind. Due to the frozen state, the orc could not turn towards the guy and only watched from over his shoulder, turning his head. For Asher, this was enough, as it only took him a few seconds to create a new spell. The guy landed behind the monster and created an ice sphere. The monster realized that he couldn't cope with this power, so he stopped resisting and trying to reach Asher. A few moments later, the leader of the monsters was sealed tightly within a huge block of ice. Asher turned around and reported that the capture of the monsters was complete. Meanwhile, we are transported to the magical city of Virent. The city's residents have already been shocked by the news about the destruction of the magic tower. The newspapers wrote that the magic tower was closed because the energy source exploded, but many did not believe it. While the 2 citizens of the city were talking and making their own guesses about the collapse of the magic tower, students who had been sent from the tower to the city for practice passed by them. Researchers who had just arrived in the city speculated about whether they had received letters from the tower. However, the attention of one of the magicians was caught by the citizens' conversation about someone planning to seal the magical tower of Bogomirn. One of the 2 residents said that he had heard that secret experiments were taking place in the tower's underground laboratory, and that this was precisely the reason for the attack. The next moment, the man was grabbed by the collar of his shirt, forcing him to spill the coffee. The magician ordered the man to repeat what he had just said. The unknown magician took off his cloak, and we could see familiar red curls. Rovalin was extremely angry, and asked the villager again what happened to the magic tower. Meanwhile, a celebration was underway at Paita's estate to celebrate the squad's return from the mission. After completing the subjugation of the bandits, the squad, accompanied by Asher, returned to safety, and Baron Pite held a banquet in honor of this. The Baron praised his knights for the work they had done, and was glad that no one had died. But he was also curious about where Asher had disappeared to. A tipsy Pite looked around until he spotted his target. Asher changed into his military clothes and arrived in full dress, accompanied by Conrad. The magician straightened his clothes and asked with a smile if he was late. The Baron replied that the boy had arrived on time and offered him some wine to start with. Asher was surprised that ordinary soldiers were also invited to the banquet, and Pite replied that status didn't matter if you stood up to defend the territory. The Baron changed the subject and asked if Asher thought the bandits were too strong, and he confirmed that he had never met such people before. The magician said that with that level of skill, these people could live comfortably doing something else. Pite agreed with him and took the parchment from Enoch, which was supposed to clarify the situation. According to the research results, the bandit leaders Varg and Vilshin were gold-rank adventurers. About a year or two ago, one of them killed his comrade and escaped. After that, their location became unknown, but apparently they formed a gang and ended up here. Gold rank is the fourth highest among adventurers, and can only be achieved through many achievements. Therefore, Asher was not surprised that the reward for them was set at tens of millions of elks. The magician realized that this was precisely why the Baron looked so pleased, because if it weren't for him, the losses would have been much more serious. Asher turned his gaze to Pite's overly pleased face and asked why he was looking at him like that. The Baron began to praise the work of the magician and said that even the adventurers sent a reward and declared him a hero of the territories. Enoch was able to calm Pite down a little, and he admitted that the wine was affecting him too much. However, the Baron once again thanked Asher for helping them rescue the captured people and helping to arrange a decent burial for the victims. Pite, surrounded by his knights, raised his glass and said that they were now drinking to the magician who had saved their territories. The banquet guests turned around and listened to the Baron's short speech. After that, everyone happily supported his mood to drink to Asher. The banquet that followed was completely different in atmosphere from what Asher had seen in the Magic Tower. At this banquet, everyone had fun together, regardless of status, while in the Magic Tower, everything was different. The warmth and friendliness here deeply touched the magician. For the first time since escaping from the Magic Tower, he could laugh heartily. The evening passed in a wonderful atmosphere that warmed the souls of the residents of the Paita estate and its guests. All this time, no one yet realized what changes would soon be brought about by the destruction of the magical tower of Bogomirn. Rovalyn meanwhile returned to the tower and was pleased to note that it stood unharmed, contrary to the rumors that had been spreading. The girl was distracted from contemplating the tower by one of the workers, who recognized her and asked how long ago she had returned from Virent. The girl replied that she had come to make sure that the tower was okay, as she had heard rumors about an out-of-control power source. Rovalyn said that even if something had happened, the building was quickly rebuilt, and then asked where Verdun was now. The worker was a little confused and did not dare to speak to the girl directly, so he simply pointed towards the crowd of people. As she got closer, Rovalyn realized that everyone standing there was studying the list of missing persons. The girl was stunned, as she thought that the guy had simply gotten lost in the crowd. Not finding Verdun among the people, Rovalyn began to look through the list of missing people. Her eyes darted from one familiar face to another. This happened until she came across a portrait of her childhood friend. The girl didn't know how to react to this, so she began to read the circumstances of the disappearance. Under Verdun's portrait, it was written that he disappeared while on duty in the power room and was presumed to have been exposed to magical energy, and his body was never found. Rovalyn replayed their last conversation in the tower in her head. Then the girl suggested that her friend go to Virent with her. That day, Verdun refused her offer and decided to stay in the Magic Tower. Memories of their childhood together flashed before Rovalyn's eyes, and she couldn't believe that this was their last meeting. The girl's eyes filled with tears as she realized what had happened. Rovalyn fell into despair and thought that she did not want to part with Verdun so easily. She fell to her knees and thought only that he was like family to her, her dearest friend. The girl's hysteria was interrupted by a familiar voice, the owner of which put his hand on the girl's head and said that anger at others would not change anything. Rovalyn raised her tear-stained eyes and saw the head of the tower. The man took off his coat to cover the girl, and Rovalyn asked what had really happened in the tower in her absence. The leader reported that during the festival, the power source failed, and all the mages in the corps, including the duty officer, died. Not only that, but years of accumulated data and research records were destroyed. Even the treasury's magic circle was damaged, causing irreparable losses. The leader said that everything that was in the treasury, the collection of spellbooks and artifacts, everything was lost, and the damage of this loss cannot be estimated. However, the main loss for the leader was object number 77, because if they could return his brain, then all the records and achievements could be restored. The man told Rovalyn that they had missed the main culprit of the power surge, but they still had a lead. The girl asked what it was, and the chief said that 3 hours before the power surge, someone disappeared without a trace. The magician used all his connections to track down the man's whereabouts and past, and found the medallion. Rovalyn looked at it and recognized the symbol of the Dark Hour. The Dark Hour is a group that not only secretly studies magic, but seeks to subjugate the world with its help. The question remained what they were doing in the magic tower, and what goals they were pursuing. The leader said he didn't know how they managed to cause the energy surge, but he was sure they were involved. The man said that he intended to create a team to destroy the Dark Hour, and even reserved a place in it for Ravelin. Looking at the girl who was clutching the medallion in her hand so tightly that it broke into pieces, the leader was sure. Ravelin has already made her decision and is ready to avenge her loved one. A few days later, the Explorers Guild came to the territory of Paida. The leader of the researchers apologized to Asher for the incident that occurred. The guild assessed the orc threat as high, so they sent out gold-ranked explorers, but the results were dire. Asher said that it was no big deal, for which the man thanked him and presented him with a certificate for the reward for this conquest. The magician read the certificate and realized that the reward for the risk and delivery of the new type of orc was 24 million elks, and after paying taxes, half would remain. The guild leader reminded them that a tax of half the amount was mandatory to pay according to the laws of their country, and they could not avoid it in any way. However, the man said that there was one legal way to avoid the tax, and Asher guessed that he was talking about becoming an adventurer. The leader was glad that Asher himself said this, and began to advertise his guild, promising that the guy would immediately be awarded a silver rank. The mage understood that being a member of the Adventurers Guild might limit his future actions, but there was something more important to him than money at the moment. Asher put the cup on the table and said that he would be happy to sign this application, because the most important thing for him is to become stronger in order to take revenge. His words confused the guild leader a little, but he still couldn't pass up the opportunity to recruit such a strong mage. Despite the fact that Asher lived as a test subject in Bohemia for 7 years, his essence remains a magician. So, after signing the contract, the guy came to the warehouse of the Adventurers Guild in the territory of Paita. A magician is always a seeker of secrets and an explorer. That's why Asher brought the corpse of the orc he had defeated here for full-scale research. The guy removed the cloth from the monster's body and was surprised that the guild had an artifact that preserves the state of what is covered. Asher decided that since the guild was on Paita territory, it wasn't worth paying attention to. The boy unconsciously sniffed the fabric and was immediately struck by a terrible smell. Asher began his examination, and the red pupils and reddish skin did not surprise the guy. Particularly noticeable is the torn mouth and a more powerful build compared to other creatures. However, these features are far from those seen in more advanced species, and his intelligence cannot be called exceptional. Asher suggested that mutation rather than evolution was at work here, but that conclusion still seems wrong. Even if it is a mutation, there is not enough evidence to explain his regeneration and incredible strength achieved solely through nutrition. Here Asher's attention was caught by one strange detail. There was a scar on the orc's head, which went against the ability to regenerate, to return the body to its previous state. This orc's regeneration is so strong that it was able to restore a burned body without consequences, but it did not cope with the wound, leaving a scar. If that's the case, then the orc must have gained his regenerative abilities after being injured. The only thing that came to Asher's mind was that the scar was the result of a scalpel cut. Only evolution could help the half-humans gain abilities after birth. Based on these facts, only one conclusion can be drawn. Someone artificially created this orc, and this is very bad. A couple more days passed, and Asher decided to hit the road. Conrad and Enoch came to see him off, to which the magician said that it was not worth doing. Conrad reminded that Asher saved his life, so it was the least he could do for him. The magician replied that he had already received too much for his help, namely the Ring of Circulation and the Mantle of Beast Skin. Enoch nodded his head and said that it was a well-deserved reward that belonged to Asher. The magician thanked Conrad and Enoch again for their kind words, and said that it was time for him to go on his way. As Asher left, Conrad shouted that he should mention their acquaintance in the branches of the trade guild. The magician just waved his hand in response and continued on his way. After some time, Asher arrived at a border village between the territory of Payet and Martes. All this time, the guy moved with the help of a flight spell. Having cancelled it, Asher landed on a village street. Looking at the map, the guy learned that this was the only village between the two territories. Asher bought an apple from the girl and thought it would be great if he stayed there for the night and went to town tomorrow. The guy was about to take a bite of the apple when his attention was drawn to the conversation of two people at the other end of the street. Asher watched them and decided that he could get some useful information. The boy used the Whisper Wind spell to eavesdrop on the conversation of the residents. The man with the small beard said that the whole problem was the goblins. They stole all the man's cattle, for which he had to pay a lot of money to hire adventurers. The interlocutor said that if the money has been paid, then all that remains is to wait for results from the mercenaries. Asher thought that goblins weren't so scary alone, but when they got together in groups, they attacked villages, stole goods, and ate people. Therefore, when goblins are discovered, The standard reaction is to call for adventurers, so there is nothing unusual in this conversation. Here, one of the men asked his interlocutor if the rumors were true that James had seen a monster in the forest. The interlocutor became alarmed and said that the village elder forbade them to talk about it. However, the man insisted on an answer, citing the fact that no one could hear them anyway. Then the interlocutor said that a few days ago James went to check the trap he set in the forest. But then the man heard the squeal of a wild boar and turned around. What James saw left him in shock. The man saw a goblin with a torn mouth, bigger than that of the orc who had been devouring the boar. The man with the beard exclaimed, but his interlocutor hastened to calm him down, since if the adventurers found out about this, he would have to pay them much more. Asher cancelled the spells and began to think about the giant goblin with a torn mouth. The guy smiled and thought that it would be difficult to accept this as a simple coincidence. Meanwhile, an expedition to destroy the goblins had already begun in the forest. One of the adventurers was a master of the bow and never missed a single opportunity to show off. The blonde girl hit the goblin in the eye with precision. There was a guy with short brown hair standing next to her and watching this. The girl was a silver rank adventurer, and her name was Myrna. The boy's name was Loke, and he was also a silver rank adventurer. The guy joked about the girl shooting from close range, and they got into a verbal altercation, which another girl quickly stopped. Her name was Iris, and she asked her colleague Mild if he had found any traces of goblins. The guy pointed to the side and said that he had found a cave that looked like a goblin lair. Iris saw a totem made of animal and human bones at the entrance to the lair, indicating that they had encountered higher goblins. The girl said that they should act carefully, so they should get rid of the warning devices and totems. While the rest of the team carried out her instructions, Iris cast the piercing gaze spell on the entire squad. The adventurers noted that their vision became much clearer, allowing them to see in the dark. Loke thanked the girl for her help, and said that this was the act of a true team leader. Having finished with the traps at the entrance to the cave, the team went inside. A strange sound made Iris stop and turn around, which only Myrna noticed. The leader hastened to reassure her colleague and said that nothing had happened, after which she followed the team. For a brief moment, Iris thought she sensed Mana nearby. However, the girl did not know that this was not an accident, as the bush from which they had recently moved away began to shake. The squad moved deeper into the cave, and soon they saw light. 3 goblins sat next to a burning totem made of human bones and worshipped it. The monsters were so engrossed in their work that they did not notice the approaching people. In an instant, an arrow pierced the head of one of the goblins, attracting the attention of the others. Taking advantage of the confusion of the other monsters, Loke and Mild rushed to attack. In no time, the guys dealt with 2 monsters, cutting off their heads. They acted quickly so as not to make too much noise. Looking at them, Myrna said that everything was going well and they would quickly complete this task, but Iris told her not to relax. The team was distracted from their conversation by a strange sound coming from the depths of the cave. Myrna assumed it was the hobgoblin and said she would check, and Iris asked her to signal in case of danger. The blonde agreed with the leader and went deeper into the cave, but what she saw shocked her. The entire cave was strewn with the bodies of torn-apart goblins. Myrna didn't know what to do. She even forgot to signal her team. Loke approached the girl and asked what had happened, but she did not know how to explain to him what was happening. Soon, the rest of the squad joined the boys and were just as confused. There were many goblins in the cave, but they were all dead, and they were not killed by adventurers. The cave was inhabited by a giant goblin who ate his fellows. The squad hid behind a boulder and watched everything from the side, not understanding what to do next. Despite the fact that the squad consisted only of experienced adventurers, none of them had encountered anything like this. Iris couldn't remember being warned that they might encounter such a giant on the mission. Iris decided to take matters into her own hands, as their main task is to destroy the monster, and she believes that they have a chance if he is the only one. The leader began to explain the plan of action to the squad, and told Myrna to take the goblin's right eye. Iris, in turn, told Milda and Loke to distract the monster, and she would deal with the rest herself. Myrna was the first to attack, as her task was to blind the giant. The girl tried to climb as high as possible, and then took aim. The goblin seemed to pay no attention to her and continued to enthusiastically eat his fellows. Myrna loaded 3 arrows at once, hoping to increase the impact of the hit. A second later, the arrows were fired and hit the goblin's right eye. The boys rushed after him, and Locke told Mild to raise his shield. Mild realized what the boy was about to do, so he raised his shield above his head, kneeling down on one knee. Loke pushed off the shield and flew up. The guy flew past the monster, hitting it with his sword. A growl came from the goblin, indicating that Locke had managed to wound him after all. The guy was happy about this and turned to see the result of his work. The last thing Locke saw was the monster's hand approaching him. The guy understood that he wouldn't have time to dodge, but he didn't want to give up just like that. Before the inevitable happened, Iris cast Mana Burst. The girl held a staff in front of her and 3 magic circles began to form around her. After that, several powerful charges burst out from the circles and attacked the goblin. Iris stood next to the monster, trying to figure out if her plan was working. The next moment, the giant goblin roared so loudly that the walls of the cave shook. The monster grabbed the goblin lying next to him on the ground. After that, the goblin threw his brother's body towards the offender. Loke and Mild were shocked by what they saw. The goblin flew straight at Iris, but the girl made no attempt to defend herself, as she was confused. At this point, Asher decided it was time to intervene in the fight. The boy used the air rail spell to deflect the blow from Iris. The girl was already preparing for death, but at the last moment, the goblin flew aside. His body hit the cave wall and broke into small pieces. In shock, Iris's legs gave way and she fell, continuing to stare at the dent in the wall. At that moment, another arrow was fired towards the giant goblin. This time, she hit the monster's right eye with precision, causing it to clutch its head and howl. Within moments, the goblin's giant body collapsed. The worried adventurers ran to their leader and asked if she was okay. Iris said she was fine, but she continued to be tormented by thoughts that if the goblin's body had hit her, she would have died. Myrna said that despite the unexpected difficulties, they still successfully completed the mission, so they will be able to receive a reward. Asher, who chose not to show himself, watched them from the side. The guy was glad that all the adventurers survived and did not notice his presence. Asher used invisibility to follow the adventurers, and thanks to this, he saw one of the laboratory's research objects. All the objects he had encountered so far had one thing in common: a wide mouth, reminiscent of a jester's smile. Because of this feature, Asher began to call these creatures jesters. But this goblin is different from most. Unlike the others, he did not have increased physical strength and did not regenerate by devouring his fellows. Asher assumed it was either just a large goblin or a failed experiment. But what really caught the boy's attention was Iris. Meanwhile, the girl told the squad that they needed to make sure there were still any goblins left alive. Asher noted near the cave that Iris had a good sense of mana and was leading the squad. The guy sighed and noted that it was a great success that the girl did not find him. However, at that moment, another person appeared in the cave. A man in black was heading towards the squad, and he was not very pleasantly surprised that someone had arrived while he was gone. Iris noted that the man did not look like an adventurer, and warned that if he came closer, she would use a spell. The man apologized for not introducing himself earlier, and said that he was the custodian of the place. The man said the monster was not meant to attract attention, but apparently brain manipulation was not enough to subdue it. Then the stranger became distracted, and asked if the adventurers had noticed anything strange in the behavior of this goblin. Not receiving an answer, the man decided that the goblin was simply large in size, which should have greatly upset the professor. The stranger spread his arms wide and said that nothing could be done about it, so he had to fix what could still be fixed. So the man said that he had to kill everyone present. Iris clutched the staff in her hands and asked if the man was really going to fight them alone. The stranger said he had no choice, because not only had they killed a valuable specimen, but they could also tell other people what they had seen. Iris asked if it would change anything if they swore not to tell anyone about it. The man took out his sword and said that there were no guarantees for this, and even if there were, he would not let them go. The stranger's face hardened, and he said he just wanted to hear their screams. The man began to approach the squad and asked which of them wanted to be first. One man replied that the only one who would die today was the man himself, and this made him laugh. However, the stranger quickly realized that the voice was coming not from the squad, but from behind. The next moment, the man felt a strong magical blow from behind. The stranger flew to the side and hit the wall of the cave. Asher stepped out of the shadows and laughed at how confidently the man threatened the party of adventurers. The man was wounded, but still able to fight, and listened carefully to Asher. Holding the magic circle at the ready, the boy said that it was too self-confident. Asher really didn't want to get involved in all this, and would have preferred to remain in the shadows. However, this stranger who suddenly appeared left him no choice. If Asher had not intervened in this conflict, the man would have certainly killed the entire group of adventurers. The magician could not allow this, since these people did not know what exactly they were interfering with. Asher remembered the stranger calling the goblin and glancing at the monster. The man in black said that the goblin was a test subject. The man also mentioned someone behind the scenes, whom he called a professor. Asher had no doubt that they were talking about the jesters. The stranger asked who Asher was, but the guy didn't think it was necessary to answer that question. The boy summoned a magic circle and prepared for battle. The man in black said that he didn't care whether the magician revealed his identity or not. The stranger said that it would not change the fact that Asher would die by his hand. After this, the man in black rushed into battle. Asher immediately cast the spell Multi-Fire Arrows. The magic circle turned red and arrows flew out of it. The enemy moved with astonishing speed. giving the impression that he possessed lightning magic. The man in black easily dodged all of Asher's attacks. Having gotten close enough, the man struck with his sword. Asher managed to conjure a shield in time, which protected him from the attack. However, under the force of the blow, the shield began to crack, which indicated that it would not last long. Asher decided to use this to his advantage and cast the Mana Pulse spell. The protective barrier burst and flew apart in different directions, sending the enemy flying away with a shockwave. Asher noticed that the man had been strengthened with energy, which was impressive, even though these attacks were lighter than those of the knights from Pate. However, although the man is inferior to the knights in strength, he is much superior to them in speed, so Asher will have to change his strategy. The man in black said he didn't know what rank the guy was, but he would increase his speed to match it. The stranger was very interested to see how Asher would cope with this. The magician showed no fear and began to combine spells. By combining Winter Wind and Ice Pike, Asher cast a double spell. The stranger was a little frightened by the fact that the magician combined spells using the elements of ice and wind at the same time. Thus, Asher got the spell Ice Peak's Explosion. The man in black felt that he was in danger, but he was not going to give up. While dodging the blows, the man noted that Asher's abilities were impressive. However, the stranger easily dodged each blow of this powerful spell. The man, sneaking behind Asher, said that there was no point in this spell, because the guy missed. But the stranger could not see the expression on the magician's face at that moment. The man thought that the guy had simply lost sight of him, which is why he didn't turn to face him. The stranger swung his sword and struck, but the weapon did not hit anyone. The man continued moving forward by inertia, not understanding how it happened. Asher, in turn, only leaned back, as he expected a blow from behind. The capillaries in the stranger's eyes burst with anger, because some magician managed to dodge his blow. Iris watched this from the side, and did not understand how Asher managed to react at such speed. The magician, in turn, glanced at the stranger and cast the spell Combustion. The next moment, an explosion was heard in the cave. For a while, due to the temperature change, water began to drip from the ceiling of the cave. The man noted that Asher's tactics were not typical for magicians, but it would not help him a second time. The magician said that in that case he would begin to fight like a real magician, after which the ground under the adventurer's feet began to shake. Asher used an earth element spell to lift the unwitting spectators upward. Iris didn't understand what was happening, so she screamed in fear. The squad did not know why the ground was rising or how high they would end up. At some point, the ground beneath their feet stopped shaking, indicating that the movement had stopped. Iris walked to the edge and said that it was landscape manipulation, but she was surprised that Asher would use this spell in battle, because it was not effective. The girl noted that in order to use such spells, the magician must have a huge supply of mana. Also, Iris had never heard of this type of fighting style before. Seeing that the magician rose into the air along with the adventurers, he thought that the guy was simply scared of him and tried to hide. However, something made the man doubt the correctness of his arguments. The stranger knew that such spells used up too much mana and saw no need for them. After taking one step, the man realized that he was standing in water. He now realized that the flame that Asher had last used had melted the ice that the mage had previously used. Without waiting for the enemy to understand what was happening, Asher used a spell with an electrical element. The stranger looked up in confusion and could not believe what was happening. The current passed through the water that had stagnated in the cave and touched the man in black who was standing in the middle of the puddle. Iris couldn't believe what she saw. Asher was the first mage she could remember who used lightning magic. The girl knew that even among the professors of the academy, only a few could use this element. Asher clearly surpassed all the mages Iris had ever met. The guy, in turn, continued the fight and used third-level magic Thunderstrike. A powerful electric discharge struck the ground and bounced off into the enemy's body. The man was shaking with pain, but he could do nothing about it. The stranger did not understand who Asher was, because he could use the elements of fire, ice, wind, and now also the element of lightning. Looking at the towering figure of the magician, the man realized that he was facing the most powerful magician in his memory. The stranger's body shook, but he could not escape a direct collision with the triple spell. The next moment, there was a loud explosion that blocked the view of what was happening. The group of adventurers moved away from the edge of the platform to avoid being hit. After a while, the dust began to settle, making it possible to see what had happened to the stranger. Asher went down and wanted to ask the man about the orc he found on Pate's territory. The magician asked if both of these monsters were connected to the professor the stranger had spoken of earlier. The man was still conscious and said in a weak voice that he now understood why the lands of Paita had become so quiet. The stranger, with his last strength, looked up at Asher and asked if he was from the Ark. The magician did not understand what was being discussed, and noticing this, the man said that it did not matter and asked to kill him here and now. Asher said he would do so only after the stranger told him where he could find the professor. The man asked why he needed it, and the guy replied that he was interested in the experiments they were conducting. The stranger knew that he couldn't let this guy near the professor, so the man tried to distract Asher, after which he spat a poisonous blade at him. The small projectile was intended to allow the stranger to take his opponent to the next world. However, the blade hit the shield surrounding Asher and fell. The magician said that if such was the man's decision, then he did not dare to oppose him, after which he finished off the enemy. As Asher watched the platform with the adventurers being released, he thought that he still hadn't managed to find the thread that led to the appearance of the jesters. All his efforts were in vain, but he still needed to finish what he started. Asher approached the adventurers cowering on the ground, and said that they must obey him now. Neither Iris nor anyone else on the team dared to say a word against it. After some time, the squad successfully reached the village, and, by order of Asher, the adventurers received additional reward from the elder. As the mage said, the elder paid them to keep quiet as soon as they mentioned the mutant goblin. Iris gave 2 bags of money to Asher, and said that their business was finished and they were leaving, but the magician stopped them, holding out a bag of money. Iris asked what it was for, and the guy replied that it was their commission. Asher gave them this money so that they could escort him from this village to Martes. On the way, the team leader Iris asked the guy about magic, or more precisely, about the theory of elements. Asher was not against talking, so he entered into a discussion with her, and before he knew it, they had arrived in Martes. Having entered the city, the guy began to look around in search of a bank. Loke said they had some reports to file with the guild, so they would head the other way while Iris gave Asher a tour of the city. The team leader asked where the magician would like to go, and he replied that he needed to receive a reward and then open a bank account. The girl said that in that case, they should first go to the city hall. Iris went in the right direction and pulled Asher along with her, saying that she knew Martes like the back of her hand. The rest of the team were surprised at how calm Iris acted, since Asher killed the man in the cave without hesitation. Meanwhile, Asher had already approached the Martes City Hall, where rewards were given out for captured criminals. The guy had trouble logging in because he hadn't had time to change his ID after changing his body. However, thanks to a guarantee from Baron Pite, the guards allowed the mage to enter. Because of the letter from Pite, the mayor of the city greeted the guest with great hospitality. The mayor's family lives in the territory of Pida, so he expressed great gratitude for the capture of the bandits. What was even more of a surprise to Asher was that the man gave him a new ID card. Thanks to this, the guy was able to open a bank account, so everything worked out perfectly. Asher remembers that he has another account that he used to use in Verente. However, if he uses it, the owner of the magic tower will be able to track him. Therefore, Asher should be very careful. Then the boy went to the local forge and asked the craftsman to make a staff out of the magic wand. The man replied that this would require materials and a little time, so he asked to come back in 3 days. In exchange for the magic wand, the blacksmith gave Asher a staff and asked him to use it for the time being. Iris asked the boy if he preferred using staffs instead of wands, and the boy said that he was more used to it, since he used to use a broom. Without going into details, the girl suggested that Asher go to the Martes public library. The boy asked if there were any books on spells, but Iris said that the existing books would not satisfy his needs. Asher dismissed these concerns and said that books with basic spells would also do. Iris asked how many books the guy wanted to buy, and he replied that he wanted everything. After some time, the boy and the girl went inside the large hall of the public library and collected all the available spell books. Iris held a large, wobbly column of books while the employee said that Asher couldn't just take everything away. Asher handed over the bill and asked that the books be delivered to the top floor of the Lorix Hotel. The worker asked how many books he would need, and the guy again said that all the books needed to be delivered. And so the long day passed, during which Asher received an award, opened a bank account, ordered a staff, and rented all the books on magic. Iris was very tired, and when they stopped to rest, the girl asked if the guy needed anything else. Asher said that was enough for today, but these words made the girl think. Only now did Iris remember that she had never asked the guy's name, so she decided to ask the question now. The guy introduced himself with his fictitious name and said that the girl could call him whatever she liked. Iris immediately became inspired and suggested that Asher switch to an informal style of communication. The girl decided that this was her chance to find out what she needed, so she asked what Asher was doing in that cave. The guy covered his face with a book and thought about how he should answer, because the words about him being there did not fit by chance. Asher decided to come at it from a different angle and said that he had been chasing the man in black. The girl thought for a while, as if trying to figure out whether the guy was lying to her or not. However, then the girl remembered that Asher had actually asked that stranger about the professor. The girl wondered if Asher could be some kind of secret agent pursuing a shadowy organization. The guy closed the book and said that he still didn't learn anything, so that was enough for today, and it was time for them to go back. The girl wanted to accompany Asher, but he refused, citing the fact that it was a long way to go. However, Iris did not listen to him and still walked him to the hotel and wished him a good night. When the guy disappeared behind the hotel doors, the girl sighed with relief, because this day was really over. The girl stretched out on a street bench and said that Asher was a very strange person. The guy has such a high level of magic that he can control all the elements. Asher has such a volume of mana that the girl is not even able to measure it. Iris also noticed that at such a young age, the boy has a theoretical understanding that the professors at the academy do not have. In addition to everything, the girl believes that with such a beautiful face, Asher must be very popular. However, when you engage in conversation with the guy, he tenses up, which makes him look like a scarecrow. At this point, Iris blushed and asked herself why she couldn't get that guy's face out of her head. The girl is sure that Asher is the most talented person you can meet not every day. Iris stood up from the bench and said that tomorrow she would ask Asher more about elemental magic. Before the girl had time to move away from the hotel, an explosion was heard. Iris turned around in fear, trying to understand what had happened. Only later did the girl realize that the explosion had occurred in the building of the Lorix Hotel. Iris immediately remembered that Asher had said that he would stop at this very place. In the cloud of fire, the girl noticed the silhouette of a man. Iris tried for a long time to understand who she was seeing. A few moments later, she realized that Asher was looking at her from behind the curtain of fire. The guy's appearance clearly indicated that he was very angry. Sometime before these events, we learned that the professor was informed that Sergen, who was responsible for the goblin, was killed. The mercenary informed the professor that traces of magic were found in the cave. The guy assumed that Sergen was killed by someone else, for which he received a glass jar to the head. The professor turned to the mercenary and said that there was no need to pretend to be a fool. The man asked again who killed his subordinate. The mercenary replied that they had not yet identified the killer, but had found evidence that someone had accepted the order from the village. The professor said he was disappointed because Sergen had been helpful, and asked if the research subject was dead. The mercenary confirmed his suspicions and said that the remains and any traces of Sergen and the object were destroyed. The professor said that the mercenary had to take care of whoever killed his people. The man was already annoyed that the two test subjects from the Pite Barony were silent. And now, to make matters worse, the experimental goblin and Sergen are dead. The professor suggested that because their experiment was almost complete, the Ark was able to detect them. After some time, the man ordered the mercenary not to return until he killed the person responsible for Sergen's death. The mercenary clearly did not have good feelings towards the professor, but he had no choice but to find the killer. The guy was able to track down Asher and waited for him in a hotel room, while the magician completed his business in the city. The mercenary wanted Asher to go to bed as quickly as possible so that he could carry out his revenge without any problems. After a few seconds of watching from under the bed, the mercenary thought that the room had become too quiet. The next moment, he heard Asher cast a spell. The mercenary jumped out of his hiding place, dodging the blow. Asher, for his part, was ready. Now we return to the present time, where an explosion occurred in the hotel. Asher watched the mercenary from behind the flames. The mercenary was shocked that the magician had caused an explosion, not caring that they were in a closed room. Looking at the angry Asher, the guy decided that he was at least level 3, so it would be better to retreat now. People on the streets, in turn, saw only what was on the surface. It seemed to them that the magician had lost his temper and decided to destroy the city. The mercenary decided to take advantage of the crowd's indignation and escape. People began to run away, fearing the wrath of the magician, and someone asked to notify the guards about what had happened. Asher, in turn, tried to understand why the killer had not reacted to his detection of magic. Now the mercenary was out of sight again, but the magician was calm. Although it would be impossible to track the man using magic, Asher noticed that the mercenary had made a mistake. The man completely hid his presence in order to escape from the magician. However, this made his existence even more noticeable. Now the mercenary felt like a black hole on a white page. That's why Asher was able to find it quickly. At the last moment, the mercenary managed to jump to the side to avoid being hit by the spell and began to scold the Ark for sending a monster to them. The killer was amazed that the mage didn't care that there were civilians around. He just continued to attack. The mercenary watched as Asher continued to create magic circles. This time, the magician used the magic arrow spell. The mercenary felt threatened and tried to avoid the confrontation. The guy jumped away from the arrow and knocked down the door to the nearest building. Asher realized that the mercenary did this in order to evade his attack. The guy had no choice but to go down to the ground. Entering the building, Asher realized that of all the rooms, the mercenary chose the one where the gang of homeless people was located. One of the men approached the magician and asked why there was a panic out of nowhere, but Asher interrupted him and asked where the man in black had gone. The man was a little drunk, so he smiled and said that Asher was a very impatient young man. The homeless man said that if the guy wants information, he must pay for it. Asher sighed and looked away, thinking that he could find the mercenary himself. Just as the guy was thinking that the killer must be somewhere nearby, blood hit his cheek. The mercenary snuck up behind the homeless man and plunged his sword into him. Asher noted that it was very mean to kill an innocent person, and from behind. Therefore, the magician no longer worried about anything. Asher waved his staff and cast the shockwave spell. The next second, the mercenary flew to the side from the blow. The guy flipped in the air and stabbed his sword into the floor to stop himself. After driving a few more meters, the mercenary was finally able to stop. Usually, the mercenary encountered magicians who could not attack and defend at the same time. So the guy decided to lure Asher closer to force him to use the barrier, and then detonate the smokescreen and escape. The mercenary decided that this was a good plan, so he rushed to attack. Asher remained in his place, showing no signs of retreating. The mercenary was confident that the mage was using a magical barrier to protect himself from the blow. However, contrary to his expectations, Asher used the Earthbone spell. At the last moment, the mercenary realized that everything was not going according to plan, because now the magician concentrated mana on the end of his staff. Asher turned his staff over and prepared to strike back. The mercenary was amazed that this magician did not lose even in close combat. Having been struck in the stomach with a staff, the killer thought he had encountered a battle mage. Asher, in turn, was so angry that he could no longer stop. The mercenary flew up from the force of the blow and cried out in pain. However, the next moment, Asher conjured the magic circle again and cast the Earthbone spell. The mercenary realized that if things continued like this, he would soon be killed. So the guy quickly took out a smoke bomb and used it. In an instant, the entire room was filled with smoke. Asher used a wind elemental spell to disperse the smokescreen. However, as soon as the smoke cleared, his mood worsened even more. During this short period of time, the mercenary managed to escape. At the place where the killer had recently been, only a stain of blood remained. Before Asher could do anything, he heard a voice from behind him ordering him not to move. Turning around, the guy saw a crowd of guards, whose leader announced that the guy was arrested for arson. The man also said that Asher would be charged for threatening local residents in the city. After some time, the magician was taken to the mayor's office of Martes. Mayor Henry Deeker couldn't believe that Usher was behind all the chaos that was happening in the city. However, the head of the Adventurers Guild, Oscar, reported that the mage was most likely the victim in this situation. The mayor was informed that someone had attempted to kill Asher when he returned, which led to a clash and riots. Oscar said that this could be connected to the recent assassination attempt on the adventurer, so he asked to entrust the leadership of the investigation to him. The mayor agreed to this and was concerned about what impressions of the city Asher would leave. Oscar reported that only the top floor of the hotel where Asher was staying was damaged, and one wanted criminal from the slums was killed. However, the head of the guild immediately reported that the killer was still wanted. Oscar also reported that the adventurer who protected Asher said that on the last mission in the cave, they encountered a mutant goblin and an armed attacker. The man also reported that when they returned to the cave, there were no traces left. No corpses, no monsters, not even traces of other creatures were found. The mayor suggested that a group had emerged that was opposing the adventurers. Oscar said that's why he tried to assign Asher a bodyguard, but there were problems with it. Rumors spread throughout the city that Asher was the one causing the unrest, so adventurers and soldiers refused to guard him. The mayor sighed and said that the situation was not really simple, so he would talk to his knights himself. Out of fear of Asher, the blacksmith completed the staff in one day, and the next morning it was in the hands of the magician, who was summoned to the mayor's office. The guy decided that since his equipment was ready, he should immediately begin the pursuit. At that moment, the deputy captain of the Knights of Martes, Jason, entered the hall and announced that he would guard Asher as long as there was a risk that he would be attacked. The knight looked at the magician and did not understand why there was such a fuss in the city because of him. Because the guy was still young and could not be a third-level magician. Asher looked at the knight skeptically and reminded him that all charges had already been dropped against him. The magician asked if he could go, and Jason said that only with his accompaniment. Asher said that there was nothing to be done about it, and walked towards the exit of the hall, ordering the knight to follow him. Jason was taken aback by the guy's impudence, but he had no choice but to follow him. Half a day passed in complete silence, but the knight's patience ran out. Jason stopped, called out to Asher and asked where they were going. The magician looked at the knight in confusion, and reminded him that he had told him that he was free to go wherever he wanted, accompanied by him. Jason said the problem was that they had never sat down anywhere in all that time. The knight asked how far they still had to go, and Asher said that they had already arrived. Stopping next to a tall building, the magician said that this was exactly the place he wanted to visit. Jason looked around and asked why they had come here in the first place. The next moment, Asher blew up the building without warning. Jason looked at what was happening in confusion and realized why this guy was called crazy. Asher said that he came here to find one person. The guy said he wanted to find the killer who attempted to kill him yesterday. Jason asked if the man was really here now, and Asher answered in the affirmative. During yesterday's fight, Asher was able to touch the criminal and cast a spell on him. The guy recently acquired a spell that allows him to link his mana with the mana of his target. Asher suggested that if the mark had been there all this time, the killer had not noticed it. Jason walked closer to where the mage stood, noting that the guy's strength was truly impressive. In the ruins of the building, the guys managed to discover an underground passage. Asher activated the tracking spell and confirmed that the trail led them inside. The mage said that this passage connected to the outer part of the city, and asked if Jason knew about it. The knight said that he had no idea about this, although he knew all the passages in the city, but this was the first time he heard about it. The next moment, it dawned on Jason that this was an unknown tunnel, which was not marked on the map and led outside of Martes. This means that they have serious problems with the security of the city. The knight immediately imagined that the monsters could use this passage to get inside the city. Jason pulled out his sword and said that they must close this passage immediately. Asher asked him to wait, because the most important thing now was to find the one who blew up the hotel. Jason said that in that case they should immediately call for reinforcements, but the mage replied that the target would escape during that time. Asher jumped into the underground passage and said that we needed to follow immediately. The knight remained in his place, not knowing what he should do. Jason thought that the mage's superficial attitude towards him was due to the fact that he was only a vice captain. The knight jumped after him, thinking that all magicians love to stick their noses up in the air. The underground passage led to the sewers under the city. The mercenary was indeed there at that moment. The guy was very angry because he had to spend too much time. After the boy escaped from Asher, he had to stop and heal his wounds. Since the magician would definitely start pursuing him, the guy had to cover his tracks with special care. The mercenary remembered the sharp-toothed smile on the professor's hand and thought that if things continued like this, the professor would try to kill him. The same symbol was on the killer's neck, which made him involved in the organization. But now his head was tormented by thoughts of escape. The mercenary shook his head and dismissed these thoughts, because the professor still had a way to get him. The boy understood that he could only hope that the professor would be merciful. However, the professor was in a bad mood and immediately called the mercenary the most famous face of Martes. When the professor came to check on the mercenary, he found out that the guy had caused trouble, and now even the mayor and the Adventurers Guild knew about it. The professor asked what kind of killer spreads information about his target throughout the city. The man demanded from the guy a clear and brief explanation of what happened. The mercenary said that after receiving the order, he immediately went to Martes, checked the Department of Transportation, and found out where his target lived. The killer set up an ambush, but the mage somehow sensed him and used a powerful spell, and then pursued him for a long time. The professor said he did not believe that the mercenary escaped only because of the smoke bomb. The killer said that this could have happened because his escape coincided with the arrival of the knights. The professor couldn't believe that some soldiers could stop a mad magician. But then an idea came to his mind. The man ordered the mercenary to immediately remove his armor and burn it. As soon as the fire engulfed the armor, it became noticeable that the magic circle was being erased from it. The mercenary didn't understand why there were still traces of magic on the armor if the battle had taken place yesterday. However, then the boy remembered how this spell hit him, and then he realized that it was a tracking spell. Convinced that they had been under surveillance all this time, the professor panicked, saying that they had been found out. The man said that he would take the sample, and the mercenary should in turn destroy everything and seal the entrance. The killer ran towards the entrance to carry out the professor's order. However, as soon as he got closer to the door, an explosion was heard. The blow knocked down the door, and for a few seconds the room was filled with fire. Asher's voice came from the entrance, saying that he now understood why the connection with the trail had disappeared so suddenly. He guessed that it might have something to do with his mark being discovered. However, it didn't matter, because they did it too late. The mercenary took out his sword and blocked the professor's view. Asher quickly assessed the situation and realized that the guy standing in front of him was the mercenary who had tried to kill him yesterday. Based on this, the guy concluded that the man standing behind him was a professor. All the objects of this man's research flashed before Asher's eyes. He also remembered the people who blindly followed all his orders and were ready to give their lives for him. Now he sees this mysterious man in front of him. The professor looked at Asher angrily and said that the Ark had sent a very strange guy this time. This is not the first time the magician has heard the name of this organization. However, Asher decided that he would first deal with the mercenary and the professor, and only then ask questions. The boy cast the Earth Spear spell, but as soon as he heard it, the mercenary stood in front of the professor, repelling the attack. The man did not like this behavior of his subordinate, and he asked what they would do now. The professor said they had no choice, so they would continue to do what was necessary, and the mercenary must do everything he could to buy him time. The fact that the man was about to leave the room did not please Asher at all, and he wanted to stop him. However, the mercenary stood in his way again, preventing him from harming the professor. The killer stood in the passage and, fending off the attacks, said that Asher was not allowed there. Asher didn't know what to do, because the mercenary would block a weak arrow, but a strong one could kill him, and then the guy wouldn't get answers to his questions. The answer came by itself. Jason stepped out from behind the magician and entered into battle with the mercenary. The killer seemed not to notice him the whole time, but the fact that the knight entered the battle did not mean anything good. Jason shouted to Asher that he would detain the mercenary, and the guy should follow the professor. The knight was about to say that he would catch up with him as soon as he was free, but the magician had already taken off. The knight and the mercenary looked at Asher in confusion, because he didn't even thank them for their help. The magician rushed quickly through the tunnel, trying to find the escaped professor. The guy was sure that the man could not have gone too far. At one point, a sharp, unpleasant smell made Asher stop. The magician found the professor on the bridge in the Great Hall. However, Asher could not get rid of the unpleasant smell of rot and decomposition of bodies. The professor knew that the mercenary would not detain the magician for long, but he was surprised that it happened so quickly. The man said that he was glad that the boy came to him, because now he could show him the results of his work. Standing next to the large cage from which the smiling monsters watched them, the professor asked Asher what he thought about it. The magician said that these were the jesters he had seen earlier, but he did not know that there was a whole squad here. The professor found the title of his creations offensive, even though he admitted that they were not ideal examples. Although these objects do not represent his ideals of evolution, they can still kill any intruder. After this, the man activated a mechanism that opens all the cells in the hall. The monsters rushed into battle, and the professor said that the magician should appreciate his work. Asher calmly replied that he didn't have that much time. However, neither the professor nor the monsters understood what this meant. The next moment, Asher cast the Thunderstrike spell. The mage activated another magic circle, causing the spell to double in strength. The spell transformed into Thunderwave and struck the enemies. In an instant, all the monsters were immobilized by the force of lightning. The professor watched what was happening in horror. Lightning combined with water and affected everyone who came into contact with the water. The professor also fell under the spell's influence, causing him to be thrown aside. As the lightning's effects began to wear off, the man came to his senses and called Asher a madman. The professor thought that he had been deceived, because he had been told that Asher was only a third-level magician. However, in order to do something like this, a person must be at least level 4 and closer to the upper limit. Asher, meanwhile, had already switched to using spells with the element of fire. The professor crawled away and said that he had spent decades completing his research, but now it could disappear in a minute. The man didn't believe that this could happen, so he activated the emergency button. The professor looked towards the huge capsule in which the monster was in the water. The man decided it was time to awaken his greatest masterpiece. In the capsule there was a smiling monster, the silhouette of which resembled a girl. The professor put his hand against the glass, but at that moment Asher's voice was heard behind him, asking where the man was going. The man turned around abruptly, asking why the boy had survived when the squad was supposed to get rid of him. Asher told the professor that he had burned all the experimental monsters, and, to make sure of this, suggested that he sniff them. The man knew the samples were imperfect, but one mage couldn't destroy them all at once. This made the professor convinced that he was dealing with a 4th-level mage. Asher noticed the monster in the capsule and asked what it was. The professor called it Opus Magnus, his finest creation. The man activated the capsule and said that the devourer embodied his philosophy and fed on flesh in order to evolve. The professor said that this is what the future of humanity looks like. Asher didn't want to listen to this madman's nonsense any longer and activated the cutting spell. At the last moment, the man managed to say that this was the ideal branch of human development. Immediately after this, his hand was cut off under the influence of Asher's spell. The magician was concerned that he was literally 1 second short of stopping the man from pressing the activation button. The guy watched the liquid leave the capsule and remembered the professor's words about how this monster combined cannibalism, evolution, and the future. The monster fell out of the capsule and began to move. Looking at this, Asher finally understood what the professor had been trying to achieve all this time. The professor laughed off to the side and said that Asher's body was saturated with mana, which made his child even more attractive. The monster opened its red glowing eyes and looked at the magician with a terrible smile on its face. The monster's mouth opened even wider and words came out about how he wanted to eat. Asher froze for a few moments, because he had never met a monster that could talk. The next moment the monster rose to his feet and screamed that he was very hungry. Asher continued to watch the object, deciding not to engage in combat first. The monster's mouth began to drool and he said that the magician looked very tasty. The subject said he really wanted to eat Asher, but the guy didn't move. The guy noticed that the creature could strengthen itself, something that magicians spend years of training on. The only thing that helped to avoid such a loss of time was powerful artifacts. Asher even wondered if similar artifacts were used in the creation of this creature. The guy understood that this monster would stop at nothing. The creature rushed into battle and moved with such speed that it was not possible to see its silhouette. Asher erected a barrier around himself to prevent the attacks from reaching him, and thought that the monster truly deserved to be called Opus Magnus. The guy admitted that as an adventurer, he finds this very exciting. At some point, the monster slowed down a little, and Asher was able to discern its silhouette and trajectory of movement. The magician was waiting for just this moment. Removing his shield, Asher, with one precise movement, hit the creature's face with his staff. The monster was thrown aside and made a large dent in the stone wall. Asher didn't look like a man who had been in mortal danger. He was sure that the devourer was no match for him anyway. Asher has one habit that dates back to ancient times. The boy lived in the magical tower of Bohemian for 7 years as a research subject. Because of this, the guy had to constantly suppress his anger. One day, when the boy returned to his room after the experiments, he used the accumulated emotions. He used his pain as a driving force and completed the theory of opposition to heaven. Perhaps that is why now, the more he feels, the more his anger spills out. Because of this, feelings stopped clouding his mind, and Asher began to think rationally. If the devourer is the professor's best work, then his physical abilities are on par with the orcish jesters from Pate. This means that it regenerates about as quickly. However, the devourer's flexibility and speed are much higher than those of its relatives. Asher wasn't too bothered by this, since he could still see all the creature's movements. The main problem was that despite all the enhancements, the monster remained not very intelligent. Asher swung his staff, and having learned his lesson from the previous lesson, the monster reacted instantly. With a joyful exclamation, the creature jumped to the side, trying to get in from the side. Asher made a very weak attack, but activated the magic circle. An earthen spear appeared in the monster's path, causing it to crash into it face on. Asher turned to the monster and said that he was so stupid that he didn't even realize it was a trap. The boy activated the magic arrows spell and aimed them at the devourer. Watching the creature fight, Asher realized that any knight could defeat it, because the monster does not distinguish even the simplest feints. Although the monster has no shortage of strength, he uses it thoughtlessly, making him an ordinary beast in humanoid form. So soon, the devourer was immobilized with a simple trap made of earthen spears. Asher walked towards the professor and said that this creature was too weak to be called the greatest creation. The man was horrified by what was happening. He could not believe that his Opus Magnus had lost the battle. According to the professor's idea, the devourer absorbs the traits of its victim through absorption. Thanks to this, he should become stronger each time. His creation was supposed to become a new round of evolution. The professor created not just a creature, but a man of the future. The devourer was supposed to be the top of the food chain, and yet his creation fell so ingloriously in this battle. Since he had only just awakened, and because he was hungry, he could not use his power. The professor looked at his severed hand and thought that if he had the chance, he would feed it to the devourer. This would help him kill the magician and escape. Asher came closer to the professor and said that the structure of the object and the remaining traces indicate that there must be records of experiments. The professor pretended not to understand what was being discussed, and then the magician began to threaten him. He reminded that the man called the subject his child, so he would kill him here and now if the professor did not give him the recordings. The man thought that since Asher was a magician, then seeing the recordings of the experiment, he might become interested and leave him alive. The boy took the book with the notes, and the professor said that it contained all the value of his cruel research. Asher opened the book and quickly flipped through it, studying the research notes. After a short period of time, the guy threw the book on the floor and said that he wouldn't need it. The professor was shocked and asked what right the guy had to do this with his work. Asher said that from a biological point of view, this research is of the highest value. However, this violates ethical standards, which can even compete with the magical tower of Bohemian. The professor still didn't understand why his work was treated that way. And then Asher said that they simply had different views. The man angrily asked if the guy was really going to get rid of him and the neo-humans so easily. Asher said the professor's plan could come at a high cost to all of humanity. At first, the boy wanted to ask the professor about what the Ark was, but then he changed his mind. Asher felt that Jason was already walking towards them and would be there soon. If a guy wants his goals to remain a secret from everyone, then he should end it now. Asher raised his staff and told the professor it was time to disappear. The next second, the room was filled with flames, which burned the professor and his brainchild to the ground. The room filled with cries of pain, but Asher stood his ground and watched. A worried Jason burst into the room and asked if Asher was okay. The magician suggested switching to a less formal style of speech and asked how the knight dealt with the mercenary. The vice captain looked battered, but said another man would have looked worse in his place, but he had done his job. Listening to everything Jason told him, Asher got the impression that the knight had simply walked away from the battle. The magician continued to look at the notes and at some point discovered a card with a red mark. While the knight was looking around the room, Asher tried to figure out where this mark was and assumed that it was near Martes. The magician became very interested in what this red mark on the map meant. Suddenly, Asher's head began to hurt badly, causing him to drop his staff. The boy realized that these symptoms indicated mana depletion, and he decided that he simply lost control and used too much of it. Several days have passed since the professor's defeat. Although peace returned to Martes after the incident, the mayor was furious after the confirmation of the professor's plans and the existence of the underground passage. As a result, the knights of the city were put on alert. Troops conducted a full sweep of the city and increased security measures, and commanders announced that they would look for new passages. However, at the moment, Asher was more concerned about the injections of mana circulation expansion stimulants. Thanks to injections that affect the body's capabilities, the guy reduced the years it takes for a magician to a few weeks. Asher was exhausted by this, but he knew it was time to move on to the next step. He had already reached the middle of the third rank in the Verdun elemental magic system. Now we are transported to a room unknown to us. On the throne we see a man with a glass in his hand, who asks an unknown person if the professor is really dead. The man admitted that he himself had been planning to get rid of the professor for a long time, so it was even better that it was done for him. The man was clearly interested in Asher and would now like to meet him in person. A few days pass and we return to Asher. Now the guy is training at the training ground of the Knights of Martes. Asher hones his skills to improve his physical fitness. During these days, the guy learned that the place marked on the map is an abandoned research center. It is located in the forest on the border of Martes and is hidden under a massive tree. There was an entrance that could only be reached by unlocking a mechanical device. Inside, other than rats and insects, no significant life forms were found. The only thing they found was the fang-shaped emblem mentioned in the professor's diary. The skin of a mahbat, known for its high physical stamina, was also found. There was no information about a group called the Ark, or those involved in breeding neo-humans. Asher tried to think about the good, and decided that his time was at least not wasted, but at that moment he was distracted by the knight. Magoo was informed that the mayor wanted to meet with him. When Asher arrived at City Hall, the mayor said he owed him a huge debt of gratitude. Thanks to the terrorist plan that Asher uncovered, Martes' men were able to capture the remnants of the group hiding in the city. However, the mayor said that they were unable to obtain any significant information, because they were all madmen paid by an even madman. The man apologized to Asher for having to hide the boy's involvement in the story, so that the townspeople would not panic. The guy understands everything perfectly well, because reputation is very important, especially for him. Now Asher needs to build his reputation if he wants to make money and gain experience. Once the boy is recognized as the mage who saved the city, he will probably get more opportunities like in Paida's territory. However, there was one reason why Asher decided to keep the incident a secret. In exchange for popularity among the people of Martes, the mayor offered to show him the storage of rare items. This place contains many rare exhibits that were acquired directly by the city or by criminals. As soon as Asher entered the vault after the mayor, his mouth dropped open in surprise. The man invited the magician to come inside and take anything he liked. Looking around the room, Asher realized that he would receive something more valuable than just money for his efforts. Among the exhibits, the mage discovered a skillfully crafted mithril sword that could easily be filled with mana. There were also many high-quality weapons and magical artifacts there, and Asher could choose whatever he wanted. Asher decided that there were many ways to gain fame, but the opportunity to obtain such rare magical artifacts was rare. The boy asked if he could appraise these items, to which the mayor was a little surprised, but said that he did not dare to interfere with him. Asher first used an appraisal spell on the escape staff, but his appraisal criteria were insignificant. Then the guy assessed the magic cloak, but soon he came to the conclusion that everything he had now was better. All the artifacts were useful, but they were not of any value to Asher. The guy was already starting to think about taking the mithril sword and just selling it to get more money. However, something still managed to attract his attention. Asher picked up a ring with a green stone with gold veins and asked what it was. The ring didn't respond to the evaluation, so the guy thought it wasn't a magical item. The mayor approached Asher and said that the guy could take his time with his choice, since they had a lot of time. The guy agreed with the man and said that he would approach this issue thoughtfully. However, it took much longer than the mayor expected, so his patience gradually wore thin. When the sun was already hiding behind the horizon, the mayor could not stand it any longer and said that it was time to make a choice. Asher apologized and held out his hand with a cross on a chain, saying that he would take this necklace of protection that creates an automatic mana barrier. The mayor was a little surprised by the guy's choice, because such a necklace costs more mana than if the barrier were created manually. Asher replied that it was no problem, but the man still felt a little ashamed to let the boy go with just that one thing. Then the mayor decided to give the magician the ring with the green stone that the boy had been looking at earlier. Asher reminded that he was only allowed to take one thing, but the man said that nothing would happen if the city's hero took 2 artifacts. The mayor asked the guy when he was getting ready to leave, and he replied that he was planning to stay in the city for a while longer because he had things to do. The man laughed and said that if the guy needed help, he could always turn to him. Meanwhile, terrible things were happening in the mines on the territory of Viron. One of the workers was minding his own business when he discovered something strange. While using his pickaxe, he came across something, so he decided to take a closer look at it. However, after a detailed examination, he became frightened, as it was a human skull. Another worker asked why it was so drooping, and he said that any other skull would have been split by a blow from a pickaxe, but this one remained intact. The worker raised a real panic, but the second man came up and simply stomped the skull to the side. The man said that it was time for them to pick up their tools to finish the job as soon as possible. However, all the other workers were now pointing behind him and shaking with fear. Turning his head, the man discovered that the skull was flying above his head and burning with a bright flame. Within moments, the bones began to form into skeletons under the magical force, and the workers realized that they were facing the undead. The man immediately ordered all workers to leave the mines, but it was too late. The undead rose up and began to attack the workers. Within minutes, almost everyone present in the mine was killed. From that day on, rumors began to spread that undead had appeared in the mine in the territory of Viron. With the appearance of creatures that could not be killed, a state of emergency was declared in Viron. Testimonies of mine survivors spread, and the entire area was plunged into fear. Meanwhile, Viron's tragic story began to spread by word of mouth. Eventually, a messenger from Viron also arrived in Martes. So this information reached Asher, who at that time was still in the territory of Martes. The boy studied with Iris for some time in order to gain experience in managing magic from her. It took the guy a whole month to do this, but he didn't regret anything. A month has passed since the professor was murdered. All this time, Asher was learning magic from Iris. During this time, the guy learned to control his strength and use it more rationally. Now the boy honed his skills by destroying monsters in the vicinity of Martes. Asher increased his strength, reaction speed, and senses, and learned to erect a barrier without using a magic circle. This left his hands free to use the staff as a weapon at all times. The guy learned to focus mana on a specific target. Thanks to hard work and perseverance, the guy can now use all these skills in real combat. Iris herself was shocked that Asher could now defeat an orc with his bare hands in 13 seconds. The girl looked at the guy and couldn't imagine if there was anything beyond his control. Asher approached the girl and said that her lessons had clearly paid off, so he was grateful to her. However, Iris began to deny the praise, citing the fact that the guy could have found out all this himself. Asher insisted that he would not have known any of this, since all the books had fallen into disrepair. The girl looked at the guy with love and did not understand why, with all his good qualities, Asher was not interested in a romantic relationship. For a brief moment, Iris wondered if the guy might have a problem with that, but the guy said he didn't. The girl ran after him and asked how he knew what she was thinking. Asher continued on his way and said that the girl's face showed it all. Iris continued to pursue the guy and tried to convince him that it was all a huge misunderstanding. However, she was interrupted at the entrance to the city. At the entrance, Asher was met by the head of the Adventurers Guild, Martes, who wanted to ask for something. The guy immediately understood what Oscar's request might be connected with. Asher knew that hordes of undead had appeared in the mines near the Viron territory bordering Martes, and their numbers were so huge that help was needed. There are rumors that contact with the undead causes curses and diseases. It was for this reason that no adventurer agreed to take on this task. Then Oscar learned that Asher had dealt with the professor on his own, so he decided to ask him for help. Initially, the guy did not intend to interfere in this matter, but he ran out of money. Plus, it was a good opportunity to improve his reputation, so Asher agreed to help. While Oscar was talking to Asher, the other adventurers were discussing the guy. They had long noticed that Asher was not like an ordinary magician, since he was not only good at magic, but he was also in good physical shape. After some time, Asher asked Iris if she was aware of the strange rumors about him, but the girl lied that she was not aware. The guy said that he was very surprised when he learned that Iris's group also decided to go on this mission. Iris said that stupid rumors about curses do not affect academy graduates like her. The girl said that they would not be on the front lines, but her team members were not proud of this, because it meant that they were too weak for a combat team. Asher immediately realized that Iris was being brave, but decided not to worry the girl unnecessarily. The guy just said that he hoped that this was a really good opportunity, just like the girl had told him earlier. After this, the detachment, consisting of several groups of adventurers, set off on their journey. All the adventurers traveled by carriage during the day, but Asher decided to travel in a different way. Some of the squad members began to worry about his mana supply after the boy had been following them around all day using flight. One of the girls remembered that Asher was quite close to Iris, so she decided to ask what kind of relationship they had. Iris blushed and said that their relationship was like that of seniors and juniors. The girl said that during the last mission, her group got into trouble and Asher helped them, so they became closer. Meanwhile, Asher, who was in the sky, noticed something strange. The adventurer suggested that Iris and Asher had studied together at the academy, but the girl quickly denied this. The girl's conversation was interrupted by Asher, who suddenly appeared and reported that a horde of undead had been spotted ahead. The guy is sure that they are pursuing the inhabitants of the Verona territory, so he rushed to help them. Before the adventurers had time to answer the guy, he had already disappeared without a trace. The group of adventurers was still too far from the conflict zone, but there were already a lot of undead. However, Asher decided that this was the perfect chance for him. The guy dedicated a whole month to studying spell magic, and it was time to see the results. Among the treasures that Asher stole from the magic tower was the grimoire. It can only be used by magicians of the 3rd level and above, but simply opening this book will enhance the magic power of the caster. This book is very valuable, but the copy that Asher brought is not registered and is related to elemental magic, and is connected to it by a magic circle. Now it's time for the first real test after completing the connection with this grimoire. Asher created a magic circle and cast the geographic manipulation spell. A flash of light illuminated the clearing, after which the earth began to shake. A barrier automatically appeared around Asher, making him inaccessible to others. People saw that the ground under their feet began to crumble and rise. However, this caused even more panic among the people, as they considered this to be another disaster. Asher, meanwhile, turned his hand over and began to clench his palm into a fist. At that very moment, a huge hand appeared from the ground. She began to rake the bones of the undead under herself. Asher combined the spells Air, Road, and Flame to create a dual spell. The wind with its currents intensified the flame and turned it into a collected charge. With a movement of his hand, Asher directed the charge towards the enemy. When the charge reached the ground, the guy transformed it again and caused an explosion. The entire clearing was illuminated by a bright light and was engulfed in flames. The bones of the already fallen undead began to burn, preventing the undead from rising again. The rest of the undead also burned quickly. By this time, the rest of the adventurers had arrived and were very surprised that the guy was still using such powerful spells. After finishing with the enemy, Asher landed and thought about the earth element spell he had written down in the grimoire. The guy thought that such power could be connected with the fact that he had improved his body, and now, in addition, uses the grimoire. Asher looked at the results of his labors and realized that everything was not in vain. He was able to single-handedly deal with an entire crowd of undead with incredible speed. Iris looked at this and thought that such skills already surpassed the 3rd level and were more related to the 4th. The girl was so distracted by looking at Asher that she did not notice the approaching threat. The skeleton stretched out his hands to the girl, and she screamed in fear. However, it all ended very quickly, thanks to the man who stood next to the girl. With one swing of his sword, the man cut off the undead's head. Iris, like the other adventurers, looked back in fear. A shirtless man with a silver medallion around his neck approached them. He was clearly unhappy that all his loot had been destroyed. The adventurers immediately recognized this man as a great threat. In front of them was the butcher Galliarch, who had platinum status. Shaking with fear, Iris said that all the undead had already fallen under the adventurers' blows. However, the man did not believe her, since there were several dozen enemies. The man received a message about a horde of undead and immediately headed here. But according to the girl, they had already sorted everything out. Galliarch noticed Asher and decided that it was his doing. The man ignored the adventurers and approached the boy. Galliarch was much taller than Asher, and towered over him like a rock when he spoke. The man asked if Asher had done all this, and he answered in the affirmative. Galliarch said that it was not good, because he was hired to deal with the undead, and the guy just stole his job. The man was angry, and said that Asher had interfered with all his plans. The boy remained calm and looked defiantly at the butcher. Galliarch said that Asher must pay for his actions. Asher jumped back and asked how much it would cost if he decided to pay in full. Seeing that the guy had increased the distance, Galliarch perceived him as a most ordinary magician who had taken a position that was advantageous for him. At first, the butcher was not going to fight, but seeing the guy's self-confidence, he decided not to let him get away with it. A sinister smile appeared on the man's face. One of the adventurers tried to stop Asher because he did not understand who he was dealing with. Galiark was not just dangerous, he was strong and had an explosive temper. A few years ago, he got drunk and started a fight in a tavern, which resulted in one of the knights being left disabled, although he was simply trying to stop a butcher. Iris said it was a serious crime and she didn't understand why this guy was still free. 3 more people approached the adventurers from behind, and one of the guys said that they had not gotten rid of Galiark because the government needed him. Iris and her interlocutor turned in surprise towards the strangers. A mage from Galiark's group named Goad said that the guild is well aware of who the butcher is and why he is dangerous, so they don't touch him. A girl from the squad named Nerian asked the guy to stop explaining and try to stop the fight, as they might get into trouble later. Goad easily stood in front of the butcher and asked him to calm down, saying that these people were fulfilling an order from Viron. Galiark put away his weapon and said that it would be easier to kill everyone and say that they were ambushed by the undead. Goad said that he would demonstrate to everyone the difference in their strength, and then the adventurers would surrender themselves. The magician turned his attention to Asher and said that the guy seemed confident in his abilities. Goad activated his spell and said that he would show the boy where his place was. Asher raised his head, trying to understand what kind of influence he was feeling now. The guy realized that this was magical pressure, but judging by its strength, Goad was no more than level 3. Asher saw his teammates hit the ground with such force, but in fact it was the simplest technique. The guy understood that this power was nothing more than bragging. Suddenly the situation changed, and now Galiark looked surprised. Goad, who had been standing next to him just a second ago, suddenly fell to his knees. The butcher realized that Asher had broken the magical pressure and knocked out Goad. Galiark knew his mage was good, and that meant Asher wasn't as simple as they thought. The butcher looked at the boy and asked his name. Asher turned his gaze to him and introduced himself. A smile appeared on Galiark's face, and he said that they would meet again in Viron. The encounter with Galiark's group ended faster than expected. By evening, the adventurers were able to reach the city without any problems. Marta's team, which was assigned to protect the surviving members of the royal family, was delayed on the way to Viron. By coming into open conflict with Galiark, Asher has earned the disfavor of some of the group. The next day, the Lord of Viron, Farnad van Viron, greeted the new arrivals and thanked them for coming. The Lord said that now he and Viron's army would go to the mines. The Order of Luas joined the expedition to help destroy the sudden army of undead. Galiark's group of adventurers were also already there and preparing for battle. The last group was a detachment sent from Martes. Before they set off, Galiark and Asher accidentally exchanged glances. The butcher smiled and asked if the boy was nervous. One of his teammates told Asher not to fight Galiark, and the boy replied that he wouldn't unless he started it himself. Besides, they had a lot more problems now. The battle had already begun, and the allies were now faced with the task of uniting against the huge number of undead. During the battle, the allies tried to help each other. As soon as they learned about the weaknesses of the undead, they immediately informed the others. Many recommended going for the head if the undead have a physical form, as otherwise they regenerate. A blood golem appeared on the battlefield, causing many to panic. The priests ran back and told the others to move away so as not to be crushed. The priests warned that it would be impossible to kill this monster with ordinary swords. The soldiers ran in panic in different directions, causing the enemy to advance into the troops. The butcher Galiark came out against the blood golem. The man was not at all afraid of the monster, and decided that this was a good opportunity to fight for real. The butcher jumped into the fray, saying it would be perfect for a warm-up. The blood golem raised its hand, intending to knock the attacker aside. However, the butcher didn't care, as he strengthened his body, due to which he pierced the monster's body right through. The monster began to spread out, gradually losing its shape. Before that could happen, Galiark tore off the golem's head. Lord Viron said that the butcher could be expected to take down this monster with one blow. However, noticing Galiark's further actions, the Lord asked what he was doing. The butcher swung his arm and threw the monster's head with all his might towards the allied support troops. The Lord and his guards didn't even understand at first where he threw it. The golem's head landed next to Asher, clearly indicating that the butcher was bragging. Asher shielded himself from the blood spatter and said that it was very rude. Galiark asked what the guy was doing here if he wasn't going to show his true strength, and asked if the guy had done any magic yesterday. At that moment, the ground beneath the butcher's feet began to shake, causing him to lose his balance. Asher used the terrain manipulation spell and trapped his opponent in a stone trap. The guy was very angry at such disregard during the battle. Asher decided to take things seriously and summoned a fireball. The charge headed straight for the stone sphere. The ball hit the spot where Galiark was currently located underground. Iris rushed to try and calm Asher down so he would come to his senses while the other adventurers admired his skills. The smoke began to clear and cheerful laughter could be heard. Galiark was currently still fighting the undead, and there wasn't a scratch on him. The man said Asher looks weak but has a core inside him and he likes that. The butcher suggested that they see who was stronger, but Asher only expressed his regrets about not hitting him. However, Asher silently accepted his offer and rose into the sky, activating the magic circle. Galliarch charged into battle and said that the one who killed the most undead today would win. Starting with Galliarch's provocation, he and Asher seemed to be in a competition, throwing undead left and right. As a result, the main strike force reached the Viron mines with fewer casualties than expected. Since the space in the mines was limited, the entire army could not go there, so only a few people were selected. Galliarch approached Asher and said that he fought well, but did not forget to mention that he himself fought better. It already seemed like a friendly argument, so Goad began to get angry, because the butcher had never spoken to him like that. The mage from Galliarch's squad clearly harbored a grudge against Asher. During their last meeting before the start of the campaign, Goad used magical pressure on the boy. The guy was confident that he could defeat Asher, and not only did he not give in, but he even responded. At some point, it seemed to Goad that the magician covered him with a glass, like a small beetle. In the blink of an eye, the boy found himself completely under the control of the enemy's mana. Goad was sure that the guy was a level 3, just like him, but something was wrong with Asher. Soon the preparations were completed, and the detachment was informed that the Viron garrison would be waiting for them at the entrance to the mines. The Lord wished the squad good luck and sent them on their way. Keeping in formation, the detachment began to descend into the mines. In the vanguard is a ranger from the Galliarca group named Narian. The girl is worthy of the gold rank, so she goes first and is the first to see the danger, after which she instantly destroys the undead. But not only she, but all members of the group effectively perform their duties. Such is the real strength of the group. However, there was something that was bothering Asher. The further they walked, the more the guy felt some kind of discomfort. It seemed as if something was pressing on the guy. One of the group members reported that they had stopped at the end of the shaft. Asher would like to scan the entire mine with mana, but if there is a lich here, they will be discovered very quickly. The guy believed that they should attack the enemy first, and then he would be able to protect everyone. Galliarch noticed that Asher was tense and asked if the boy was scared when he smelled death. The man said that he couldn't pinpoint the direction, but there was definitely some powerful undead in that mine, which piqued his interest. Asher finally agreed with the butcher and said that his instincts were correct, after which he asked Iris to stay closer to him. The girl was scared that even Asher was tense and asked what was there, but the guy did not give an answer. Suddenly Asher noticed that a strange noise had started at the end of the shaft. The magician turned to a guy named Rox and asked what was going on. Rox said they checked to see if there were other tunnels, but then they discovered something strange. A light appeared from the end of one of the passages. Asher thought that there should be no other exits from the mine except the one they came from. The guy didn't understand where the light in the dungeon could come from. The soldiers began to walk forward, approaching the light to see where it was coming from. Galliarch suddenly extended his hand, blocking the path of the remaining adventurers. In front of them appeared a skeleton in a cloak with a sword in his hands, which made the place look like a tomb. The entire floor of the cave was covered with human bones. One of the soldiers noticed the coat of arms on the cloak and said that it was the sign of the Kingdom of Estria. Verdun is currently hiding his identity, as he escaped from a magic tower that belongs to the lands of the Duchy of Riviante. The duchy declared independence from the Kingdom of Estria, so it is very strange that their coat of arms appeared in this territory. Everyone was confused, which made Asher think that things might not be as they seem. Goad began to shake, for this cast a shadow on his intelligence abilities, and he was afraid that Galliarch would be disappointed in him. The butcher asked if the threat would go away after they destroyed the skeleton with the crest on his cloak. Before Galliarch could engage in battle, Goad stepped forward and said he would deal with the skeleton himself. The guy said that there was no need to suffer with such a simple undead, so he could handle everything himself. Goad asked the priests to help and perform the purification. Asher knew that if they performed the cleansing, they could weaken the undead and destroy them without taking too much damage. As soon as the energy touched the monster, it began to move. Goad decided to act preemptively and sent a giant stone flying. The skeleton did not dodge and simply continued to stand in place, waiting for the stone to approach. At the last moment his eyes flashed red. Asher immediately sensed the threat and took a defensive position. In an instant, the giant stone split into many pieces. The skeleton split it with its body and moved towards Goad at great speed. His bony hand with long, sharp claws was already preparing to deal the magician a crushing blow. Goad stood frozen in place, waiting for the inevitable. However, a few centimeters from the guy's neck, the hand stopped. Galliarch prevented his squad member from being harmed and grabbed the skeleton's arm, preparing to strike with his axe. Seeing this, the skeleton broke free from the butcher's grip, leaving his limb in his hand. Galliarch assumed they were facing a death knight, but the priest said with fear that it was a lament knight. The priest said that although these knights are weaker than the death knight as an individual, It has its own strengths. For example, they can control the undead. At the moment, the Knight of Lamentation is raising skeletons from the bones that will fight with the team. Asher moved closer to Garriark and said that in that case, their plan of action was clear. The guy raised his staff up and began to collect mana. Asher said that they must destroy the Lament Knight to stop the resurrection of the undead. Before that, however, Asher said he would re-landscape the area. He wants to do this in order to neutralize the enemy's advantage in numbers. Iris felt the familiar vibrations of the ground, but she was still not used to it. The girl screamed and asked what Asher was going to do. The floor beneath their feet began to drop sharply. Garriark looked up and asked if Asher was going to fight the Lament Knight alone. The boy replied that when they came down, each of them would have enough enemies to fight. Asher said Garriark wouldn't be bored. New monsters appeared on the battlefield and drew attention to themselves. The rest of the squad will fight the undead that have appeared. Garriark will be faced with the task of dealing with giant skeletons. The priests will help him with this, and Asher himself will be left alone with the main threat at this time. Now all responsibility for the outcome of the mission lies on his shoulders. He must fight the Knight of Lament alone. The enemy was already ready for battle. Holding his sword tightly in both hands, the knight rushed into battle. Asher jumped to the side, avoiding the attack. Rising into the air with the help of the magic circle, the boy summoned multi-fire arrows. However, the knight easily dodged such simple attacks. Asher remembered that the undead were weak to the holy and fire elements. So the guy decided that he should concentrate on the fire first. Asher strengthened the fire spell, making it double. The boy summoned a wave of fiery arrows. The shells struck the ground continuously, preventing the enemy from moving freely. The Knight of Lamentation found himself cornered. Asher saw this and decided he had a chance, so he materialized a spear of fire. After that, the guy threw it at the knight and pierced his chest armor. The impact site looked like molten metal was pouring out of it. The enemy did not move and continued to attack Asher, this time throwing his sword at him. The guy fought off the attack and did not understand why the undead were still completely fine. If Asher blocks poorly, his mana shield can be destroyed and the recoil will knock him off his feet, leaving him defenseless. The mage attempted to combine a water and ice spell into one to freeze the enemy. The Knight of Crying found himself bound by a thick layer of ice in an instant. The boy watched the knight carefully to make sure that the knight was completely immobilized. Asher decided that if fire couldn't destroy him, he would crush him with sheer force. Asher cast the Earth Spear spell 3 times in a row. With the help of another spell, the boy increased the concentration of mana in the spears. Even though the Crying Knight was trapped in ice, he still understood what was happening. He needed to get back what was taken from him at any cost, so he concentrated the energy inside himself and broke free from the icy shackles. Asher looked at the knight in confusion, because he did not know how he was able to repel the attacks. However, what was more important was that the knight's appearance had changed, and now he looked like a devilish skeleton radiating dark energy. Asher felt his head begin to ache, and he became angry that the mana had run out at such an inopportune time. The guy understood that if things continued like this, he would be destroyed. Suddenly, the ground beneath Asher's feet began to shake, and the boy lost his balance. The ground began to split, but the boy did not feel that it was magic. The next moment, Garriark appeared from underground and struck the lamenting knight. The butcher was covered in blood, but with a smile on his face he said that he would not allow anyone to take his main dish. While Asher was fighting the lament knight, the rest of the team wasted no time. They had already managed to deal with all the undead that the knight had summoned. Rock said that if Narienne and her gold rank weren't with them, the 3 liches would have destroyed them. Goad appeared from behind and said that it was offensive when all the merits were attributed only to the girl. Iris, meanwhile, looked around and said that she was more interested in whether everything was okay with everyone else. Myrna said that now was not the best time to think about the others, because they had to figure out how to escape from this place. Since Asher had lowered them to the very bottom with earth magic, the party was trapped, from which only a mage could pull them out. Raising their heads, all members of the squad realized that they were trapped in the earth, with no way out. At that moment, the ground that had formed a semblance of a roof above their heads began to tremble. A few moments later, the rocks began to fall. The adventurer's view opened to the sight of Garriark fighting with the Knight of Lamentation. The butcher ignored his surroundings and continued to strengthen his arms with mana. Garriark struck his opponent again and again. The Knight of Weeping did not stand aside and struck back. Once on the ground, the undead was able to pick up his sword. For a moment, Garriark froze, afraid of being struck by a sword. However, a second before the collision, the Crying Knight was hit by an airstrike. The butcher took advantage of this to retreat to a safe distance. The knight was thrown to the side by the force of magic. The adventurers looked up and saw Asher, who had flown in after Garriark. The guy looked exhausted and a little confused. Asher landed, and Garriark asked him why he didn't stay to rest for a bit. The magician said there was no time for that. Asked what the butcher thought of the enemy, and he replied that he liked the Knight of Tears. Galliark said that he would go first, and Asher should prepare to fire at that time. Having received consent from his ally, the butcher rushed into battle, raising his axe above his head. The man strengthened his axe to strike with the power of destruction. After that, Galliark strengthened his leg with mana to deliver another blow. This time the knight was unable to block the blow with his sword, causing it to hit him in the chest. The force of the blow threw the knight to the side. The cloak behind the Knight of Tears fluttered and turned the surroundings into a red shroud. At the last moment, Galliark noticed that skeletons began to emerge from the shroud and were already very close to him. Asher backed him up and used the mana explosion spell to throw the undead aside. Galliark approached the weeping knight and grabbed him by his fluttering cloak. The butcher then flipped the skeleton over his head, slamming it onto the ground behind him. Looking up, Galliark heard Asher's warning to step aside. The magician did not wait for a reaction to his words, and delivered a powerful fire blow to the target. Galliark managed to run away at the last moment, calling Asher crazy. However, the butcher let his guard down too early, and paid for it. From the fire flew the sword of the Knight of Lamentation, which pierced his stomach, pinning him to the ground. Galliark looked up and saw that the knight himself was heading up towards Asher. The magician looked at the approaching undead and could not understand what to do. He had already tried everything that was possible, and he had very little mana left. The protective necklace around Asher's neck responded to the threat and activated. The Knight of Weeping struck, sending the mage flying downwards. Asher flew several meters and hit the ground. The boy remembered that the mayor of Martes had warned him that the necklace was using too much mana. The boy had previously been worried about mana depletion, but fortunately there were no consequences. However, Asher's reserves are almost exhausted, and his left shoulder is dislocated from the last blow. However, the biggest problem was that just before the boy could defeat the knight, his body was bound by black armor. After her appearance, the Knight of Lament became much stronger. In a moment of despair, golden whips appeared. 3 priests surrounded the weeping knight and tied him with whips. Seeing the black armor on the monster, the priests were horrified, since there was no record of anything like this in any church archive. At this point, Galliark had his sword out and was preparing to strike again, warning the priests to hold back. In an instant the chains broke. However, the knight felt threatened and pulled the whip towards himself, causing the priests to fly into the air. Galliark was confused by this and slowed down. The Knight of Tears, meanwhile, hastened to free himself from the whips that bound him. Galliark first grabbed the priests in his arms and scolded them for not holding up well. Having released the priests to the ground, the butcher told them to come to their senses and prepare to hold back the undead again. Gode caught the moment when the knight focused his attention on Galliark and decided that this was his chance to prove himself and defeat his opponent. The guy was confident that he could handle it this time. Gode used the Earth Spear spell again to strike his opponent from behind. However, the Knight of Tears sensed the threat and instantly turned back, smashing the stone into small pieces. One of the stone fragments hit Goadu in the neck, incapacitating the boy. Galliark was very angry when he saw this. Even though Asher wasn't friends with Gode and didn't have the most pleasant feelings for him, he still got angry. In an instant, Galliark grabbed the priests and closed the distance between them and Gode. Distracting the knight with tears, the butcher ordered them to immediately begin healing the magician. The enemy decided to finish off Asher first, who was at his limit. However, as soon as he turned his back to Galliark, he found himself very close. The butcher grabbed the crying knight by the head and pinned him to the ground. Galliark looked at Asher and asked how much longer he had to wait for him, but the boy didn't understand what they were talking about. The butcher asked how long it would take the boy to gather enough mana for a powerful spell. Asher finally came to his senses and replied that he would need a few seconds. The butcher smiled and raised his fist. After that, he told the guy to get ready, and he himself began to strike the knight blow after blow. Asher jumped to the side to avoid being hit by the shockwave. The Knight of Weeping began to come to his senses and slowly rise with the man on his back. Galliark said that he would break the armor where it had previously been broken, and then Asher would be able to direct the magic inside. Before the butcher could carry out his plan, the knight slammed his elbow into his stomach wound, causing him to lose his concentration. However, Galliark was quickly able to pull himself together and overcome the pain. He said that the corpses should not move, and then delivered one of the most powerful blows. Thanks to this, the armor on the knight's back cracked, revealing the place where Asher's first fire spear had hit. The butcher looked at it as if he himself did not believe that he would succeed. Asher, in turn, realized that everything was going according to plan, and now his mana was enough to continue. The Knight of Crying finally came to his senses, and concentrated his strength in his fist. The monster then punched Galliark in the stomach, knocking him off. The butcher was completely exhausted, and his wound was hurting so much that he could only watch as the knight approached him. At that moment, Asher stood between them and told the monster that he was his opponent. The guy noticed that the hole in the armor on the knight's chest had not yet closed. Asher was confident that if he concentrated magic in this place, he would be able to destroy the enemy. The guy began to concentrate the charge in his hand, but the knight's hand inevitably approached him. At the last moment, the enemy's attack was blocked by ice magic. Asher looked to the side and saw that Iris had performed the attack. The girl couldn't just watch this and not help. Despite the fact that the girl is more inclined towards ice magic, she is not yet accustomed to using elemental magic. Asher silently praised the girl for her efforts. After all, it was thanks to this attack of hers that the knight opened up, giving the magician the opportunity to reach his weak spot. Asher placed his hand against the hole in the armor and cast a spell. His fist was engulfed in intense flames, and this time the boy was confident that they would win. An image of a boy appeared in Asher's mind, with the man in whose body he was reaching out his hand. There was an obsessive thought in the boy's head, that he had to return home no matter how many battles awaited him. The man ran to say that he would return home. He promised that he would return to his homeland and his family. That's what he thought, but at some point everything turned against him. The patriarch turned away from his faithful warrior. The man learned secrets he shouldn't have known. Therefore, the patriarch decided to get rid of him. All of the man's plans collapsed the moment he was ordered to be buried along with his soldiers. The man saw himself being buried in the ground. The only thing he thought about at that moment was that he still had to go back. He remembered Lorien's face and remembered that he had promised to return. Asher came to his senses and opened his eyes abruptly. The priest and Iris leaned over him and asked if he was all right. The girls said that they defeated the Knight of Wailing, but Asher suddenly lost consciousness. The priest said that it could be related to the medallion that Asher holds in his hand, because it emanates the same spirit as the knight. Asher looked at the medallion and remembered the boy he saw when he was unconscious. The priest said that the boy was clutching the medallion too tightly, so he couldn't take it, but now he can deal with it. However, Asher decided not to give it to the priest and said that he would take care of it himself. The priest was worried, because he believed that anything could happen. Asher assured him that everything would be fine, and there shouldn't be any problems. At that moment, Galliarch, whose wounds had already been treated, approached them and said that this was a very modest catch. The butcher said that there was no need to worry about Goad, since emergency measures were taken in time, and the boy survived. Asher rose from the ground and said that this was good news. The guy said that since the cleanup was complete, they could finally return. When the party returned to the city, all the monsters were reported to the Lord. He was horrified when he learned of the undead commanding the undead, and hastily gave orders for a purge. Fortunately, no one who entered the mines died, but there were many casualties. Looking into the memories of the deceased, Asher felt some anxiety, and this did not allow the guy to fall asleep. This incident clearly showed Asher that he had become stronger, although the guy was still at level 3. The guy came to the conclusion that real battles actually accelerate growth. With the magic book that cut the connection and increased mana, Asher can use spells equivalent to the 4th level. However, this is still too little to reach the potential of the head of the Bogomir Magic Tower. But Asher is confident that if he doesn't give up, he will definitely achieve his goal. The guy moves towards his goal in small but confident steps. So far, he has never lost his way. Thus ended this long and difficult journey. The priests of the Lewis Order decided to stay and continue to monitor the mines, and the adventurers split up and went back to their areas. Galliarch looked at Asher dejectedly and asked if he was really leaving. The butcher smiled and said that the guy didn't look like an adventurer or a mercenary, so he assumed that the guy was going to Grey. The man was surprised that Asher did not understand him, and asked if the magician really thought that it was enough to just become famous for people to come to him. The boy replied that this was his original plan, and Galliarch called him naive for it. Myasnik explained what it means to be a shadow information broker. In Grey, information is bought and sold to those whose skills have been verified, and they are also the hub that organizes requests. Asher asked what kind of requests these were. Galliarch said that there are many people like Asher. They don't like to follow the rules, but they want money and fame. The magician asked why the butcher was telling him all this. Galliarch said that they had gone through the flames of battle together, and had become comrades in arms. Asher thought that this information could actually be useful to him, as it would allow him to face stronger opponents. At some point, Iris interrupted their conversation and said it was time to leave. The girl thought that upon returning to Martes, she wanted to learn even more about elemental magic. When Asher did not come to the cart, the girl asked if he was really going to leave them. Instead of answering, the guy thanked the girl for the magic she gave him. Asher said that with such training, Iris would be good at controlling elemental magic. The guy said that it was really time to go, which brought tears to the girl's eyes. The girl's memory flashed through the moments of their meeting and spending time together. Everything happened so suddenly, and the girl survived difficult situations. She learned the theory and magic of elements that she couldn't learn at the academy. Iris understood that they met suddenly, and would part just as suddenly, but she didn't expect it to happen so soon. However, The girl understood that she could not ask Asher to always stay close. The guy shook the girl's hand as a farewell and said that they would see each other again. The girl swore to herself that the next time they met, Iris would be someone he could be proud of. With tears in her eyes but a smile on her face, Iris said goodbye to Asher. Meanwhile, another girl who was eager to meet Asher was angry. Ravelin pinned the man to the ground and demanded an answer. The girl was interested in why the Black Hour was targeting the magical tower of Bogomirn. The Dark Hour is a group of people who have strayed from the path of orthodox magic. Ravelin attacked their third secret laboratory, but still did not learn anything about who was behind the attack on the magic tower and why. The girl believed that this was due to the fact that low-level magicians were not privy to such subtleties. Every day, Ravelin remembers Verdun, who died because of their actions. Memories do not allow the girl to lose the desire to know the whole truth. One of her teammates greeted the girl with laudatory speeches. The guy said it was amazing how a simple second-level spell could have such destructive power. Waldeck's third apprentice, Lucard Maniacs, said that this was to be expected from a man who was different from the rest. The girl flew past and reminded him that she could have handled everything herself, but the guy said that he couldn't leave her. Lucard said that the girl could become his master's fourth disciple, so she could not be allowed to suffer. Ravelin said that the guy should worry about himself, because 7 years have passed since the publication of the multi-continuity theory. Many are looking forward to Lucard's next work, but will it be able to create the same excitement as 7 years ago? The guy smiled and asked if the girl believed these baseless rumors from their past. Lucard recalled that the Tower Master himself recognized this diploma work. The guy asked if the girl was saying this out of envy, but Ravelin turned everything around in her favor. She only asked why a person with such an impeccable mind could only rise to the 4th rank in 7 years. At this point, the girl decided to end the conversation and flew away. Lucard was left alone, and his face showed that this conversation had made him very angry. The guy concentrated his energy and thought that Ravelin had always been unbearable, but lately she had completely lost her temper. Lucard was comforted by the fact that Verdun was dead, so there were no witnesses to the work being stolen. But nevertheless, the guy was irritated by the fact that Ravelin was becoming more confident every day. Lucard was already at his limit and said that dealing with someone third-ranked wouldn't be that difficult. However, if the guy acts under the influence of emotions, he risks losing the favor of the Tower Master. Lucard decided that he would gradually move towards the 5th rank, and then no one would become a threat to him. The guy was confident that this time was on his side. We returned to Asher, who, before leaving Veron, on Galliarch's recommendation, stopped in the village of Grey, and has now arrived in Cohen. This city is known for its industry and manufacturing, so it attracts those who are looking for stable work and value public order. However, due to the living conditions here, there is also a large gap between rich and poor, with the Koken slums known as the worst. It is in these slums that Asher must find what the butcher advised him to find. The difference with the main area struck the guy, because even the slums of Martes were not so bad. But at least it didn't smell so bad here. The guy's gaze was caught by a large sign. The guy knew that somewhere around here he could buy information. Asher entered a squalid-looking building that was also terrible on the inside. There were no other visitors besides him, and apparently this was due to the fact that it was not yet working hours. However, as soon as the worker mentioned this, Asher informed him that the butcher had recommended them to him. The employee's gaze immediately became more interested, and he asked what the guy's name was. The man said that the boy looked exactly as described, and then invited Asher to go further into the passage that would lead underground. Finally, the worker warned Asher not to create problems, so as not to burden them with more work. The guy didn't answer anything and started to go down the stairs. A few moments later, Asher found himself in a dark, small room. The guy looked around and thought it was a warehouse, but he didn't notice the man standing to the side. The stranger made his presence known and invited Asher to go further. A minute later, the guy found himself in a large, clean tavern, which was hidden behind a tent in the utility room. While looking around the tavern's guests, Asher discovered 2 mages, as well as 1 unknown person. Besides them, there were 2 more swordsmen here, and the guy thought that they were all here to find work or learn something useful. The man in bandages escorted Asher to the door and said that it was his duty to deliver him here. The man asked the boy to wait a little at the table in front. Asher came closer and began to wait for something unknown. After some time, in the reflection of the glass, the guy saw the silhouette of a man who greeted him. The man with green hair and glasses introduced himself as Pale, an information dealer in the southern regions. Pale looked Asher over appraisingly with his green eyes, through the thin lenses of his glasses. The man on the other side walked up to the table next to which Asher was standing and invited him to sit down. Pale said Asher's accomplishments since arriving in Pate's territory in such a short time have been impressive. The guy thought they were deliberately following him. However, Pale said that information is the most valuable thing they have, and that it contains power. The man asked what Asher wanted, money or a job, and the boy replied that he wanted both. Pale said he could arrange an order for him, but orders and information were separated by levels. Asher noticed that the papers the man had just been holding in his hands had disappeared, but magic had nothing to do with it. Pale explained that as a merchant he always risks his life, so he evaluates trust based on worth and ability. The man pointed at Asher and said there were no exceptions to the rating system. Asher knew that information about the treasures of their magic tower was currently unavailable to him, but he needed money, so he could take a small order. Pale said that the guy would be able to choose the order himself, but first he should fill out a form. The man said it was just a formality as his pen rose above the paper without human assistance. Pale said Asher was more inclined to research than just swinging a sword. The man said that if this is really the case, then he has one task that would be perfect for the guy. Pale handed over the envelope and said that it was not much different from the boy's previous travels, in which he hunted dangerous creatures. The man said that they even have orders to subjugate a half-human, but this is not the first time. Asher opened the envelope and read the task he was about to complete. Pale said his target this time would be the Howling Wolf.